Welcome to Law and Licensing Committee. I'm Melissa Ellis. I'm chairing this committee. I apologize for our late start. We got out late and needed to hurry and eat lunch. So anyways, we appreciate all of you being here and your patience with our late start. I'm going to go around and just have our committee introduce themselves. Why don't you go ahead and start?
I'm Ben Rasmussen, Director of Law and Professional Practices. I'll be helping to staff the committee today.
I'm Kathy Helgeson, Committee Secretary.
I'm Brittany Cummins, Board Member.
I'm Carol Lear, I'm a Board Member.
Jenny Earl, Board Member for District 1.
Thank you. And we also have our attorney, Michelle Buse, over here. And is there anyone in the audience that would like to introduce themselves? Okay, we'll let you in. Oh, go ahead. Yes. Just go ahead and stand and tell us who you are and who you're representing. Oh, great. Great. They're from the Access Committee. Tracy. Great. Thank you. Anyone else that would like to introduce themselves?
Thank you. I'm Terry Shoemaker, the Utah School Boards Association, Superintendent's Association, could be here.
Great. Thank you. Yes. Thank you.
Since everybody else is joining, James Kaczynski, Western Government.
Oh, great. Thank you. I didn't recognize you. So I appreciate it. We have a public sign-up sheet, which is empty.
There's one thing.
Oh, there's one. I see, Sarah. Okay, thank you. And then 2. I didn't get to the 3rd page yet.
It's on the first page.
Oh, I see it now. Sorry, my finger was covering it. If there's anyone that would like to, that didn't get a chance to sign up, please let me know. Okay, we'll go ahead and begin. We're going to start with item 5.1, which is Board Policy 5001, Advisory Committee for Equity of Educational Services for Students and Access Bylaws. And Ben will go ahead and cover that for a minute.
Okay, so what we have here is we've been working with the, Lorraine Austin's been working with the Access Committee to update the original Access resolution and convert it into a board policy as was the board's direction earlier last year. And then we've also created a second document, which would be Bylaws, which is just some supplemental procedures and different things that Access requested to include in a set of bylaws for their committee. So we would be asking for a motion on both the board policy and the Access bylaws for this agenda item. But essentially, we've updated the resolution to make it into the policy, and I'd be happy to answer any questions, or Lorraine, and I'm sure the Access members could answer your questions if you have any on those 2 documents.
Okay, are there any questions? Are there any questions from committee members? Seeing none, would you like to make a comment, or the Access Committee? Are you feeling? Great, thank you. Okay, I'm seeking a motion if there's no questions. Board Member Cummins?
I move that we approve Policy 5001, the Advisory Committee on Equity of Educational Services for Students and the Access Bylaws.
Okay, so the motion on the table is that we approve Board Policy 5001, Advisory Committee for Equity of Educational Services for Students and Access Bylaws. Is there any discussion to the motion? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? That passed unanimously. Thank you. Thank you for being here. We'll move on to 5.2, Board Policy 5008, Student Advisory Council.
Jeff.
And Jeffrey Van Holten will present this for us. Sorry. There. So you can take a second, but go ahead and introduce yourself and then.
So Jeff Van Holten, Policy Advisor for the Board, and the staff member that staffs the Student Advisory Council.
Okay, would you like to take us through the different drafts? I'd maybe give a summation of what happened last month, if you don't mind.
Sure. So it was essentially two separate conversations that we were having last month. There is the selection process conversation, and then there is the board policy and board membership on the council conversation. So to go to the selection conversation, the committee last month gave the directive to kind of coalesce around the idea of let's go with the current selection process. We wanted to incorporate telephone interviews for finalists into that process, as well as perhaps find a way to incorporate board members earlier on in terms of keeping them informed of what's going on. So I do have that incorporated lightly in the policy. If you look down on page 2. Nope.
Oh,
It
the
should be
policy.
of the policy, it should be the most recent draft. Sorry,
Draft
and I'm on
3.
page 4 of the most recent policy draft that was uploaded, I believe, earlier today.
There's only one draft on board docs right now.
Does it have edits on page 4 in blue? Yes, the draft that's on the screen is correct.
Oh, sorry, I had pushed 5.3, so that's why I had a bunch of drafts.
Okay.
I apologize.
So I tried to incorporate the edits to reflect what was discussed last month. So you would have a selection committee that would narrow down the applicants to at least the top 3 candidates for each open position. Then the advisor would conduct an interview with the top 3 candidates for each position. And then the advisor would make recommendations to the board member whose district has an open position based on the application and interview conducted. And this would all take place before the names are submitted fully to the board for approval.
Thank you. I apologize that I wasn't here last month for the discussion, but since that meeting, we went to NASB, and I am interested. I was interested in this prior to us even adopting this Student Advisory Council, but they have an elected, at least one of the states that the students was from, they have an elected, so their peers elect them. And I said, well, one of the concerns that we had heard when looking at that concept was how do they reach students not in their area to do it? And so they narrowed it down by school, and then each school would go and they'd have to go through that process of, which most of us don't like, having to be an elected official, but it also has given them a lot of good experience. And then the students felt like they knew who their representative was. And I just was wondering if that has been discussed and what hiccups, I know the board ultimately chose, but why? Because I feel like we didn't really discuss it because it was kind of shot down as an idea.
Sure. The primary issue with going that route or a similar route would be having the superintendent nominate a student from the district or a principal from the school. Is the board was looking at having diverse experiences being represented on the board, and typically the types of students that get chosen through those processes are, the student body president type student profile. And you're probably not going to get a lot of representation from, say, the average or below average grade achieving student or students that have other different types of backgrounds that could provide a different point of view. So the concern was it would create a lot of one type of point of view.
Right. Sorry, I'm going to go and then I'll get you. One of the things that they had talked about, that some of the students were looking at, was changing academic requirements so that you would pull in more diverse students. Anyways, just something to think about. I know it's not your decision, it's the board's, but board member comments or vice chair comments?
I was going to speak, I had another question, but if I could just
Go
share
ahead.
my thoughts on that particular thing is that I think it's not just about grade level, but it's student perception as to, how do you run an election at that age? It's very much a popularity type issue. And so when this was established, just in my thoughts, as really getting not just an experience for these students. It's not about necessarily just what they're experiencing, but really getting authentic advice from them. And what is the group of students that we would like to get that advice from? Is it, just the very popular kid that always is feeling successful in everything that they do, or the kid who is marginalized and feels really frustrated with the system, and why, and what are their experiences? And so I think an election process, while it's a good experience for the student, limits the voice of the population of students that we are trying to represent here at the state level. Can I ask my other question? So I'm curious about line appointment of SAC members, line D. The advisor shall make a recommendation to the board member whose district has an open position based on the application and interview. So does that, because the recommendation, the appointment will come from the full board. And so I would suggest that we just take out that member portion of it, and the advisor shall make a recommendation to the board for the recommendation. That way, because anyways, the recommendation has to come to the whole board if we're going to make that decision and vote on those things. And so just taking that part about the specific towards the member that lives in that area.
Okay, when you're ready, would you want to make an amendment?
Wait. I
Oh,
wanna
sorry.
speak to it.
Go ahead.
Well, and I actually like that in there. And as a matter of fact, I would maybe even encourage if during that interview process, if that particular board member wanted to be in attendance or help with that, make that recommendation. But I actually like it in there. I think it's good for that board member to be actively involved in that process. So I like that. And then from there, if I'm understanding this right, from D on, you would take that then to the board itself, and then the
Correct.
recommendation. So there is that facilitating with that actual board member, right? That's what I'm understanding this is. I actually like that. I think they're more aware of what's going on and more involved. So I would encourage we leave it in. But I had another comment too.
Do you want to?
Oh, yes. My comment has to do with and I understand election process would be difficult and kind of a maybe, I don't know if chaotic's the right word, but when you're doing if you're pulling, anyways, it would be a tricky process, I think. But to the process we're in right now, we're asking you to represent who? I mean, who are they representing? The way we're going through right now, they're representing really themselves in some ways, because they didn't have to go necessarily through there were individuals that applied, but, and I could be wrong, but are they going back and actually consulting with, is that happening? Are you seeing that happening?
Yes, and
You are.
that
Okay.
has been encouraged. And actually, all of the students who applied that were not chosen, we contacted them individually and asked if we could provide their information to the student from their district that was, so that they could consult with them.
Okay, is that happening? I mean, we're facilitating on our end, but is that taking place? Sometimes when you do have the election type of a thing take place, others are asking, they're more aware of it than on the other end, and so they're able to carry on different dialogue than someone who's, in some ways, this becomes an appointment, not an election. Anyways, so just some thoughts there. But.
Vice Chair Cummins?
Yeah, I think we're toggling back and forth the two topics. So, but back to the D question, because the way it's written in this policy, it doesn't talk about the board member participating in the process. It basically just sends the recommendation to the board member. And so it's, what do we want the process to look like? Because I don't know that that's the right wording that even you're trying to get at, nor does the wording that I would appreciate. So I'm just saying, I think that doesn't get to anyone's request or desire or whatever. And so I think it's, do we want a board member to be part of the interview process? That I think we need to say yes or no. And if not, then the recommendation needs to come to the full board. Because there's no other step. How does that board member then come and present that recommendation to the full board? Because eventually it's a full board appointment.
Right.
So.
Well, and we can add a step. Before I turned over to you, I don't know if you have any ideas on this, and obviously the board would have to approve it, but one of the things that I really appreciated from the students that we interacted with, and I had a couple of one-on-one conversations with them, was the amount of communication that they do have with their board. And I'm just wondering, it doesn't necessarily have, I know the discussion yesterday was about the board members appointed there, but just more holistically, looking at the entire board, do you have any recommendations for how to help us to know who these students are?
So I think it depends on which direction you'd want to go. Personally, I would recommend, I do think it's important that all of you should know the student from your district, who they are, why they were chosen. And I think it's important for the student to feel like they can access you as board members. It gets tricky though, because I would hate to see, and I'm not suggesting this has happened because it has not happened, but I would hate to see the advisory council then be politicized.
Right.
And to have the students being kind of influenced to go one direction or the other on any given topic, and then have that be presented to the board as some kind of unfettered advice when it was really kind of influence. So I think there needs to be some kind of mindfulness toward that, and maybe some mechanism in place so that the interaction is kept kind of objective. But I don't see why interacting with the board members on some level would be prohibitive. I do think it makes sense that they know you exist, that you're people, and you're accessible, and your thoughts.
Well, we haven't even, I haven't ever even seen them. So they're just names on paper at this point. And anyways, but talking to the students, and I can't remember where this one was from that was one of the main speakers, but I mean, I know there's always concerns about that type of thing, but the value that she had from interacting, it wasn't just the one. I think you're going to see more you could see more of a political nature happening if you're only accessing the one versus just a general interaction with the whole board, you know. Anyways, I really would like to see something put in place so that I feel right now they're hands off and we don't even know. And if they came and recommended us, it may not mean much, because I don't know who they are. You know, I think that there'll be more value for me as a board member in their perspective if we know who they are. But I'm going to go to Board Member Earl and then back to Vice Chair Cummings.
Yeah, I want to make a motion that we do strike, we strike D, but at the end of C, we add, and help me if the wording's wrong here, or you guys can.
So you want to strike the entirety of D?
D, the advisor shall conduct an interview with the top 3 candidates for each position, and shall invite a board member from that district to be part of that process. Yeah, we can put if they wish. I mean, it is optional, so I don't know how you would.
Well, but shall
if they-
invite doesn't mean that the board member must attend.
Then put may.
Shall invite means they
I
need
still
to be
think they
invited.
shall invite.
She wants to be invited, but they don't have to.
No,
Right.
no, but that,
Decline respectfully. and
so that does the same thing as D in some ways if they want to be part of that process, but depending on.
Okay. I apologize. You were in the queue, but we can get back to it. So there's a motion on the table to amend Board Policy 5008
Yes.
to replace D under subsection, is it committee membership? I had to scroll up to find the policy number.
It was 3, under 3.
But what
Adding it
subsection?
to C.
Is it under committee membership or under?
Oh. Appointment of SAC membership. Is that what you're asking?
I just have to find the right place on here so we get it official.
I'm on page 4.
Page 4. Okay, so strike D under
3D on page
3D under appointment of SAC membership to say,
And then you're going to
I'm adding B
add
and,
this language to C.
add this language to
To the end of
C.
C.
And strike D.
And shall invite a board member from that
And
district to be part of that process. He got it.
The board, it would be the board member, not a board member from the district, right?
Shall invite the board member from that district to be part of the process. Okay, so that's the motion. Any discussion to that?
Yeah.
Vice Chair Cummins.
So I'm going to vote no, and I think it just goes back to my philosophical thoughts on what it means. I guess it's this difference between this is a student experience and this is truly a legitimate advisory committee to our board, right? And so I think it can be a student experience, but what is my place as a board member in their experience? Am I guiding? Am I mentoring? Am I teaching? Am I associating? And I know those are beneficial things, but do I truly want this to be an advisory committee to me? Like, I trust them to be advisory to me because I trust their opinion. I trust who they are as young adults and having strong and important opinions to share. And so I'm very cautious to move into that place where I am putting myself as an associate to say, you know, here I can lead you, I can be a part of your learning experience, because my experience as a board member is very different from what we're asking them to accomplish as a student advisory committee, which, like I said, that's my philosophy and how I'm seeing this as an opportunity to our board. And so I worry about lobbying board members by parents and those people out there saying, oh, I want my kid, you know, so-and-so's just like this, and I know you, or those kinds of things. And so it puts us in this personal place where now we have to make a decision based on, well, I know you and I don't know you, or you called me before the interview and you didn't call me before the interview. And so I'm just very cautious about the process. If we really want just an authentic place where students can express their opinions and advise us, then I'm very cautious about how we interact in the processes that we put in place. So.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and make a comment. And there are just philosophical differences of how we think this should run. And I don't see the problem with more of a mentoring role. And to me, by making sure that we have representation from all of this diverse community, it's awesome. But then it doesn't necessarily represent adequately the true nature of the state. And so if the advisory council comes to us and says, you know, this is the opinion of the council, and then it's going to shape our policies based on their recommendation, and yet it wasn't truly a representative perspective of the state as a whole because we handpicked different people to sit on that committee, then that can actually skew the authentic nature, because we've said, okay, we need someone from here and someone from there, when the entirety of the state makeup may be completely different. Not that I don't want that population, and I am not saying that in any specific nature, because it's going to look completely different, but I think we've already skewed the authentic nature by saying that we want these specific representatives on it. So I don't know that, anyways.
Well, and my only thought is, I mean, we do these with other advisory committees, so are we skewing the results for those when we interview or conduct those kind of interviews? We just did that this last week. So do we skew the result on that? Well, in some ways, maybe we do, because we are interviewing, hopefully not, but we're still interviewing and we're carrying on that, you know, that element. So and so I don't know how, somehow I guess we want this hands-off approach to the youth. Is that, and I think they're wanting to be part of if they're wanting to be part of this, they're wanting to be part of the process. And to eliminate access then seems to be contrary to the process itself. So.
Yeah, and I agree with you, and I was thinking about the access interviews as well. The only difference is that they would know who their interviewee is prior to showing up at the interview, because it would be, I know who my state board member is, I can find their phone number online, I have access to them. So that's my concern, is that we are publicly available and they would know who was part of their interview process.
Okay, I argue the same point. Members of other entities that we're carrying on interviews know who. They may not know specific members of the, you know, state school board, but they do know who would be conducting the interview itself, because they could carry on that same element as adults if chosen to. So, yeah, you're right. It could take place, but I still think that there's that relationship, that mentoring element is still critical in this, and I think it will play a critical role for these youth. So.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Board Member Davis, did you have a comment? Maybe. Turn on your light.
Yep.
I just am trying to really wrap my head around this whole conversation. And I mean, honestly, I think that we can sit in on the interview. Well, I don't think that's going to be terribly problematic. I don't think I would advertise, to your point, that we are, that your board member is going to be your interviewer. I don't think I would advertise that.
That's what the policy.
But I mean, are people going to be reading the policy? How do we even advertise for these folks to be on the advisory committee in the first place? And I think to an extent, we may be overthinking this a little bit too, because I just don't think we're going to have people beating down the door to do this.
Well, okay,
Yeah.
let's all talk on the mics, but I think it's also important to remember that things can change. And so if we go down a road and it's not working, we make shifts.
Yeah,
we
that's what I was
change.
going to say as
It's
well.
not that mistakes are made, but we improve things when we recognize where pitfalls are. So, so there are motions on the table. Any other discussion? Okay, you guys have to decide who wants to talk. Board Member
Go ahead,
Lear.
Cindy. Did you have more to say?
When we use the word mentoring, I'm like, what does mentoring look like? Are we going to bring these students in and mentor about processes and policies in general and how they're made and get feedback from them as we ask them questions? Or are we going to mentor them about our personal philosophies about socialism or the Constitution, or, how our different feelings, and what are they going to go home and say, this is how my board is mentoring me? How are we defining mentoring when we say we should mentor these young people who are coming here? Are they coming here to be mentored, or are they coming here to advise us? I guess I'm looking for some clarity there.
I don't think we have a definition written down. And I've never even met them, so I would just say, in my opinion, when I say mentoring, I'm not thinking in the philosophical sense, more in what it's like to be a public servant and things like that. So that, but I'm sure there's different views, so I think it would be important that we create definitions if we were to go that route. Board Member Lear?
I'm of various minds on this, and I am pretty sure we're overbaking it. But I was thinking along the lines that board members should be involved and be able to help, because we would know some of the people that would be, not all the people, so that puts a different perspective on it. And then I also, I would like some consistency. If board members are going to be involved in access interviews, if board members are going to be selecting other advisory group members, I'd like some consistency. Why would we not be involved in this particular selection process? So I'm also reaching for consistency. On the other hand, and it also, there's some board member frustration sometimes with staff doing things and board members not having as much involvement as we would like. If these people are going to be advising the board and not staff, shouldn't the board be participating in selecting them? So that's another factor. Then the other side of it is, I don't think this was originally how it was envisioned. I think it was originally envisioned as an opportunity for young people to get together and talk about state government and education, and then kind of coincidentally provide some information for the state board, at least from a certain group of students' perspective. So that to me says that I would rather have them be more independent. So all I'm saying is I think there are two different philosophies at play here, and now that I'm kind of focusing on it, it seems like one philosophy might have been one board member who worked with staff to develop this idea, and it sounds like another group of board members who have a different philosophy. So maybe I'm just going to ask Jeff in like 30 seconds, how was this originally envisioned so that we are not like all over the place?
So the original vision was brought to us by Kate DeGroot, who is currently on the board. She was a student that goes to Skyline High School, and she wanted to have the opportunity to give feedback to the board from the student perspective on what the board does.
Great. That is a helpful reminder. Thank you. And not to, she wasn't looking for mentoring or necessarily.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
I'd like to move to amend the motion for consistency's sake that shall invite a panel of board members to be part of the process. So strike out from the district and add the word.
If we're amending it, we should be able to.
It's just amendment, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
No,
you're fine.
So add the word a panel
I like that.
and of, and strike the word the board member from that district.
So plural board members.
Do you have a number of board members in mind?
Well, right now we have 2 on access, and maybe they should be, but maybe they should be rotated.
Correct. So to be consistent with access, the only reason why there's 2 is because we're the only ones that have been showing up, right? And so it's a matter of,
Oh, I thought we selected you too.
That's who came.
No. So it's,
Different day.
and so it's how do we, it obviously would have to be under a quorum of board members and who's available and who would like to
Fine.
participate.
I just was curious if you had
Yeah.
something in mind.
Okay, so there's an amendment to the amendment on the table to add the words, a panel of board members to be part of the process. Any discussion to the amendment?
I like the amendment. I think I feel comfortable with that. I think, then you're not having to try to coordinate different days with different people, that kind of a thing. We're doing it these days, please, if you were able to come, or, that kind of thing. I think that sounds good. Yeah.
Any other discussion to that amendment? Okay, we'll go ahead and take a vote on the amendment to add the words, a panel of board members. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? That motion passes unanimously. So now we need to vote on the amendment to Board Policy 5008, which is to add the following language to the end of 3C under appointment of SAC membership, and shall invite a panel of board members to be part of that process, and strike subparagraph 3D. Any discussion to that motion? Board Member Lear.
That's not the only amendment, right? There's also an amendment on page.
Well, we haven't, we're just voting
we're
on
just-
this amendment, then we'll get to the whole
Okay.
document.
All right, that's want to make that.
Yeah.
I didn't understand that. Thank you.
That's fine. Okay, any other discussion to this amendment? All right, so we'll go ahead and take a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes unanimously. So now we'll go to the document as a whole as amended. And so that's includes all of the underlined portions. Is there any discussion to that or a motion?
My motion is to unstrike on page 4, the red, any of the red, to unstrike those. Those have been struck, and I would unstrike those. I think it is important to have representation from the board on there, and 2 members I think is a number that we have for other entities. So that's my motion.
Okay, so the motion on the table is under committee membership 1 little I, oh my goodness, 1A little I, oh my goodness, 1, I have to scroll to the next page.
It's
1B.
And my eyes are going bad. 1B little
And
double I,
double I, and
to reinsert those. And
under council leadership, under E,
where
Where
what
it's-
page is that on?
it's on
Page 5.
5, where it puts on the
Okay, and
non-voting
under
members
council
of SAC.
leadership
Coordinated. Or do you mean that?
to reinsert 2E, the
Oh, I see.
struck out words. Is that where you're going?
Yes.
Okay, so the amendment on the table is to reinsert the language under committee membership 1 little b and double little I. I'm sure there's a better way to say all of that, more legal. And
don't think so.
also to reinsert
Pretty sure not.
under council leadership, the portion struck out under 2E, reinsert that.
We just,
Any discussion to that, Board Member Davis?
Oh, can I amend the motion?
Can I give a minute for people to talk real quick? Because it was a toss-up if I was going to call on you or Board Member Lear.
I have to part ways with my great colleague to my left and say while I would like to participate, while I think it's appropriate for board members to participate in the selection process, I think I've learned a lot lately about attending meetings and not participating. And I think that is the role of this group. I don't think we should be voting or participating. I think it's the role to hear from these individuals without the influence of board members, though I think observing would be fascinating. So I don't support the amendment.
Okay. I'm going to go to Board Member Davis again now. So you can go ahead and do your amendment and then.
I'd like to amend the motion that it includes as on a rotational basis. And I'd like to speak to that. Her amendment is to
So on.
add that language back in on B, two little i's, 2 members of the board, instead of appointed by the board chair. I'd like to change that to on a rotating basis.
2 board members on a rotating. Trying to think of a better way to word that. 2 board members appointed on a rotating basis.
And I can
You can
speak to
it,
that
yes.
because I may need to change that amendment, but the reason is when we were in DC, Linda Hansen, who said this was kind of her baby initially, she was the one saying, I think for board members to get a feel for what's happening there, we may need to have our board members rotating through to see what's going on. I can remove the amendment if we just get rid of the whole thing, because board members can visit whenever they want to any committee. So we don't necessarily have to be divided up on this rotating basis. But I do think when just 2 are assigned to be there all the time, you get, like, I thought you were assigned to the Access Committee, and I thought that was an assignment. So I didn't even think I should go to those interviews. But so I think for clarity purposes, we either just do it like we do everything else, and when board members want to attend, we attend and listen, or we have a rotating basis.
I think what she's saying is it would need to say appointed on a rotating basis. Otherwise, it's board members on a rotating basis. Well, do you want it assigned, or do you want just people to show up when they want?
Can I add some clarity for the motion?
Yes, please.
So the motion that's on the table is to add it back in. And so I don't
She's
know if
changing
you're
the wording.
trying to change
Amend the motion to say, so
If
if
it's
we
added
add
back
the
in,
board
it would need
members
to be
back
changed.
in, I would want it to be on a rotating basis.
But do you want them to be just random, whoever shows up, or do you want it appointed, like there's a structure, your month?
Well, this would indicate that there would be a structure.
So you don't,
But if it's just random whenever, then we need to get rid of the whole thing.
right. So do you think that that's clearly,
So right now, as I've got it down, it's adding on a rotating basis, so it would be appointed on a rotating basis, and then we would delete this language by
okay.
the board chair.
Okay, so before you had deleted appointed, so that's what I was trying to,
Does that reflect what you want, Cindy?
Yeah.
just 1 second.
I'm confused.
Did you answer his question?
Could you repeat that one?
He just
So,
asked you if it was
The
what,
language on the screen, does that look like what? So we're deleting by the board chair after appointed, and then adding on a rotating basis.
It would have to be scheduled by the board chair, right?
right,
Board leadership.
board leadership. Okay, Vice Chair Cummins.
That was just my question of how would the rotation
I
be
think it needs
established?
to say leadership or board chair. It's probably better to do leadership.
5, 4,
That's up to Cindy. It's your motion.
like that? Does that work?
I have a clarifying question. I'm
Board
not
Member
sure
Lear?
what happens to non-voting members. Did you just mean to leave that crossed out?
She's reinserting non-voting, so it would clarify.
So it would read, there'd be voting,
They would be non-voting
No,
members.
they would be non-voting members.
Yeah, that's clear,
And they're
clearly
appointed-
clarifies.
But they're appointed by the board, on, I
Okay.
guess, if I can still make a comment after my clarifying question.
Yes.
I think allowing board members to attend whenever they want, as long as they're non-voting members. It would not preclude that. It would just mean that there would be two assigned.
You probably should show up because it's.
It's your week.
I feel like that's too much organization for me.
I like it because it adds a level of responsibility to the board members, helps board
I don't
members be a
I call a
part of it.
question. Can we call a question on this? Yeah, I hear you. Can I call a question?
You can call the question. It
I
has
would
to
like
have a vote.
I would like to call a question.
Okay, so we're calling the question on the amendment,
Product.
and it needs a 2/3 vote. All in favor of calling the question?
Aye.
Okay, that passes. So we'll go ahead and vote on the amendment to the amendment, which is to add on a rotating basis scheduled by board leadership and delete by the board chair. That's the amendment to the amendment, and then we'll get to Board Member Earls. So any discussion? I guess we already did that, and we can't, but all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that motion passes unanimously. Now we need to get to the amendment as amended, which is on committee membership to reinsert the stricken language of 1B and little I and add on a rotating basis scheduled by board leadership, delete by the board chair. And then under council leadership to reinsert the stricken language in 2E. Any discussion to that amendment?
So I'm going to vote no on this amendment just because we still have non-voting members, which puts the board member at the table during the discussion, which is my biggest concern about all of this. We as board members would then be part of a committee discussion that we are looking for authentic advice on, not to insert our conversation. So if we just leave what's on lines meetings under subheading meetings, 1E, board members may attend a SAC meeting as observers and receive feedback from the SAC, which means that there is a portion of interaction no more than 7 board members should attend. And so I think that is the satisfactory place to leave this, where we sit and we observe. And it is a fantastic experience to go and sit and listen to what these kids have to say. It will blow your mind, what the conversations that they have. But to be sitting at the table and even inadvertently creating direction to their conversation, I think makes it difficult. And so I am going to vote no, because I don't think that we as board members should be at that table. Observe it, listen to it, and be odd, but being at the table, a part of the conversation, I think is not philosophically where I want to go with this.
Right. Thank you. Board Member Lear?
I was Brittany's longer comment is now clarified to me that I was not sure about the voting, non-voting, or the extent of participation. It sounds like it's choice between being participatory board members versus observer board members. Is that accurate? And if you want to be an observer board member, then you would vote no. Is that right? Okay.
Okay.
You could do that as,
Board Member Earl?
Yeah.
you could choose to do that if you were part of the, my main thing is that I don't know why it's this hands off, like somehow we're not competent as board members to help in putting together, and see even down on E, to assist the advisor in putting together what goes on there. So I disagree. I think that not necessarily that people have to pull their chair up to the table and direct the conversation. And maybe that's a personality thing. I'm not sure, but I don't think it's a. We're scared that if the board members are there, they're gonna corrupt or destroy the authenticity element of this kind of a thing. So I still think there needs to be some structure. We're talking about a youth group. We're talking about even if it's consulting, with the advisor or whatever on these things are important to us kind of a thing. So someone's doing that, right? I mean, someone's doing that now, right? Is board leadership saying, hey, can you put these on the agenda? Where's that agenda coming from? Is that what's happening?
It's being driven by the students.
Oh, so the students are just deciding what goes on the agenda. So, okay. So they're, anyways, go ahead.
Go ahead, Vice Chair Cummins.
We as a board, like any of our advisory committees, have the opportunity as a board to bring an agenda item to our board to request something of any of our advisory committees. So if we as a committee or a task force or a board say we would like the student advisory committee to look at this, then that would, as a board, we would select that and it would go to and be placed on their agenda. So we have that opportunity to direct their agenda through assignments and questions that we want to have them answer.
I'm actually okay with what Vice Chair Cummins is saying, but I really think it's so important that there is more access to this committee, and that there is interaction, time for conversation with the students, and that it's not just driven by, I'm concerned for the same things that I really appreciate and value our staff, but I'm concerned that staff inadvertently could be the ones directing the students, and so it's a little bit of a safety net, in my opinion, to make sure that there's board participation at some level, just to make sure that, because we are voted on to represent the people, and then it just kind of helps with that. So I'm kind of over it. I don't care if they're sitting at the table or not. I just want to make sure that we have interaction with the students, and I think this hands-off approach, I don't think is doing anyone any favors. Board Member Davis.
I'm going to vote no for this, not because I think there's nefarious whatever, but just because of that epiphany I mentioned in our big board meeting. I feel like because of the nature of the role that we have, when we start talking, they will talk. I've just seen it so many times in my own house and in classrooms, and I just think when we're there, it would be better to listen. But I also completely agree with what you're saying, and I certainly think that we should, and with what you're saying about we can add the students. I love that they're driving the agenda, but I certainly think that we can add. Maybe we have specific one or 2 months or every third time, whatever, times built in where it's a board conversation, and maybe that's part of what it is. So it's designed that way. So we are conversing together, and they can ask us questions and we can answer, and that's something that's designed. And I think there are ways to accomplish both of those things without necessarily just having two board members always sitting at the table involved in the regular conversations and the daily work.
We have a time certain in 2 minutes, so I'm going to call for a vote on this. Can I do that legally?
I'll call a question.
Okay, thank you. All in favor of calling the question?
Aye.
All right, we'll go ahead and take a vote on this amendment policy to, my goodness. Okay, we're still working on the amendment, which is to reinsert, just as stated up there. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
No.
That motion fails. And now we're going to go ahead. Sorry, we voted, yes. We're going to go ahead and vote on the policy as a whole. Well, I need a motion for it. I don't think I had one.
Yeah. I move that we approve policy 5008, Student Advisory Council, as amended.
Okay, so the motion on the table is to approve policy number 5008 as amended. Any discussion to that motion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. That motion passes. I can't decide.
Are you voting on
I have to vote. I'll be a no. I really want to see more interaction with students. Okay, thank you. So let's go ahead and move on to 5.3, which is the,
Can make that happen.
oh, sorry, 5.4.
5.4. This is mine.
Thank you. 5.4, R277710, Intergenerational Poverty Interventions in Public Schools, Continuation and Amendment. And I'm going to turn the time over to Angie if she's ready.
Yep.
5.4, so we have to go back.
5.4.
It's a time certain.
Yes, thank you. And were you projecting, would you please for just a minute, Ben, so that, and then I will switch off in just a moment. But R277710, Intergenerational Poverty Interventions in Public Schools, is a rule that's up for its 5-year review and continuation. And as we were reviewing the rule, we also recently, the program staff, who are Camille Shake and Robert Palmer, who are both here, and I don't know if you want to, would you like them to come up to just be prepared? Why don't you guys come on up, and then they'll be here for questions once I finish the summary. But we realized with the termination of, or us talking about school fees, many of these programs have been charging fees, and we don't think in many cases that it was appropriate for them to be charging the fees, or if they are charging fees, they need to make sure that they're subject to fee waiver. So you'll see kind of a new section on the, I think it's the 4th page of the rule, titled Program Fees, starting on line 76, which really is just a restatement of the law. The school fees rule, which is R277407 in general, applies to these programs, but we wanted the programs to really be clear that if you're going to receive a grant, that you are subject to the school fee rules, school fees provisions. The other thing that we changed is that most of the programs, once we set up a grant application in rule, usually the board delegates the scoring and the approval of those grants to the superintendent. And this was an anomaly where these actual grants have been coming to you for review and approval. And as we talked to staff, it was recommended by Lorraine, actually, that we change this unless you aren't comfortable. And if you aren't, we'll go back to having you actually approve the grants. But to have the superintendent approve the grants as we do with all of our other programs. So you'll see how the wording's a bit different to reflect delegating that responsibility for the approval of the grants to the superintendent, which is essentially our program staff who are here. They work with a review panel to score and evaluate those grants. And in the past, they have never had the board not accept 100% of the recommendations of the review panel. So just for that information. And so that's kind of a summary of the rule, why it's come before you, a summary of the changes that are being made, and also just wanted to bring the committee's attention to the fact that we have Tracy Gruber here in the audience. She's the director of the Office of Child Care within DWS. They are partners with us on these grants, and so she's also here in case the committee members have any questions that would relate to DWS's role in this program. So,
Thank you. We appreciate you being here, and also you making time to come here. We appreciate it. Board Member Lear.
I have a clarifying question. So I heard what you said about the superintendent's role. Is that added in, or is that you're just explaining? Because our version on board docs doesn't have it, right?
So if you look on lines 88 through 94, right now the language says that the superintendent shall solicit grant applications and then score the applications to make recommendations to the board. Instead, the language now says that the superintendent, in addition to creating the scoring rubric, which they already do, we've already been doing that, reviewing them, then we would award them. You can see that on 93.
And just to clarify, I can see that now. And the superintendent, who's doing the awarding on 93?
That's staff, the superintendent.
Based on.
Yeah, and the review committee.
Okay, let me just see if that's really what it says. The superintendent shall solicit, review, and it says award. So,
Based on the recommendations of a program grant application review panel.
oh, okay, all right, based on the recommendation. It should be, it is recommendations, great. Thank you. That was not, maybe being dense, thank you.
And I have a question. The requirements that the review panel goes on, are they listed in this, where are they listed in the rule?
So the program requirements are all starting on line 49.
Okay, so it's
So
all
an applicant for a program shall design a program that includes the following, right? And those components in that program requirements section, that's section 4 of the rule, is what's included in the application, and that's what your scoring rubric is based on.
And have these been going on the consent calendar in the past?
I'm not sure what the process was. We're currently in year 2 of 3 of the grant cycle, so we came into this just recently.
Yeah, there were different staff that were leading this program the last time they were
We're
approved.
not sure. We could do some research.
It's-
I think they were on the consent calendar though, because I
it
don't
says by the
recall
board.
them being in a committee meeting, being a committee review.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Davis, did you have?
Can you give us some examples of these programs?
They would include after-school programming, so before school, after-school summer programs really targeted towards academic support, as well as supporting the students and the families and connecting them with appropriate services that are from the different partners mentioned in the bill. So Department of Workforce Services, so help with parents finding access for creating resumes, or how do I look for a job? So the 2-generation approach, so not just focusing on either the parent or the child, but both.
Chair, can I ask a follow-up? How many of these are awarded versus how many applicants you have? The percentage of applicants actually receive a grant?
Currently, we have 8 local education agencies receiving these awards. I don't have that data from the last application cycle, but we can.
Of how many applied?
I think it was
that information.
maybe 15 applications, but I can follow up and get you that information.
And 8 were selected? Well, can I ask one last follow-up question?
Yes.
What's the scope of amounts on these grants? How much money are we talking about?
It's based on if they're an existing after-school program versus if they're already have some other services going on. So on lines in the grant eligibility, line 39 through 44 has that information. So we see awards anywhere from 40,000 up to 200,000.
Oh, sorry, I missed that.
You're okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So it shows 100 to 150. So is 200,000 the top end? Should we amend that? Do you see where on line 44 it says or between 100 and 150?
Yeah, so we might need to amend that because we have one school district that has, I think, 6 after-school program sites, and so they were awarded that. So we might need to amend that.
So do you anticipate the top end being 200,000?
Yes.
So we could change it from 100, so have the range be 100 to 200,000?
Yes.
Okay,
Be okay with that?
yes.
Committee that we chose.
Do I need to make a
I think so, yeah.
amendment? Okay, I mean, I go ahead and call on Board Member Earl, but we'll make sure that happens.
So my question would be, I'm trying to understand why, is there a time issue? Is that the reason why we're making the recommendation for the board not to review or to approve this? I mean, what's the rationale behind?
I'll tell you exactly what
change?
happened.
Okay.
So Camille and Robert were talking about submitting applications to a committee, and Lorraine said the board doesn't normally do that and recommended that we propose to you that the superintendent do it. But if you'd like to keep it the same, we have no preference. It's just most programs, once you set up the standards for the application, usually the superintendent does the scoring and the granting, but we could continue to put them on.
I just wondered if there was
the
some kind
consent
of a
calendar.
restriction that was prohibiting it from going forward or something,
I
so.
don't think so. And we could just put that language back if that's what you would like to do.
Okay.
It's either way. I think one of the issues was the timing, because the recommendations do come, right? And But ultimately, you can see that we would, meaning they would bring the applications or their recommendations to you before July 1, so that then they could notify the grantees by August 5th. And so that was in
Okay.
there.
I think I would like to leave it the way it is, that section of the, with still coming before the board. That's my amendment. And what was the, and then
You don't-
changing,
You don't have to make an amendment, you just
Oh.
vote no,
oh, okay.
because it's already
Okay.
stated, right?
Well, but the other items on there, we want to,
Yeah.
Right, so you could split it out.
Yeah. So I would, sorry, just to process that, because if we get a motion on the table to approve draft, is it draft 1?
Then we can do it.
Then
Yeah,
we could
go ahead.
amend it, that way the draft will go forward
Right.
the way the committee
Yeah,
wants it
so
to look.
please go ahead and do it.
I move that we approve R277710
Then you make amendments.
Got
draft
it.
1
Thank you.
on first reading and send to the board on second and final reading.
Okay, so the motion on the table is to approve draft 1 of R277-710 as amended. Any discussion to the motion? Then we have a couple amendments that need to be made. So now go ahead.
do you want me to make amendment now, or do we need to
Yes,
vote on
go
it
ahead.
first? Okay, so I'd make the amendment that lines, oh, now I got to find it again.
That's how we should have done the last one. Thank you.
Sorry, I went out to find that 200,000 where it goes. So what would it be? That
It
lines
was line like 90.
89 through, or 88, that we don't change lines 88 through,
Well, I think you still need the scoring rubric.
Just
Right.
94 and 95 is
Yes.
what you want.
So
It would just be
Okay,
line
so-
Strike 94 and 95.
okay, so on strike 94 and 95. And,
So probably all.
And
do
one
you want me to
for-
do them all in one, or do you want to just,
So what you would do is strike 93 and 94, and you would keep all the way, and then keep,
And do you have to do down here
make
too?
funding recommendations to the board. You'd reinstate, so D, 93 would now read, make funding recommendations to the board, period.
okay.
Okay? And then, yes, you'd reinstate all of the language on 103 through 105. And if we do that, are those dates okay that are in there? Because we never talked about whether the June 23rd and the July 1 dates, are those okay?
I think the June 16th deadline might be a bit early.
Oh, I see.
So June 23rd is still,
But then you do have to provide recommendations to the board by July 1.
By
it's
July
saying.
1. Okay, then
So is
let's
June
keep it.
16 and June?
Yeah.
or
But do we
23rd?
have a board meeting in July?
No, but you just.
Could you do it in August?
Should we
still?
say no later than August 10th? Because sometimes if the August board meeting is like on the 7th, you wouldn't meet that deadline.
Okay.
Because ideally, we'd bring these probably on the consent calendar in August.
Okay.
So like the other motion would be to reinstate all of the language in 103 through 105 and then change the August 5th date to the 10th.
It can be one.
Yeah.
So the is that satisfactory to you?
yeah, and we just need to add 200,000, right? The
Well,
upper
we can
limit
do
for
that
40 or you want to
separate
do that
because-
separate? Okay.
Yeah. So the amendment on the table is to, on line 93, to strike award grant funds to LEA based on the recommendations of a program grant application review panel
And reinstate.
and reinstate and make funding recommendations to the board.
Okay.
And then also on lines 103 to 105 to reinsert that language. And then on line 106 to change the date to August 10th.
Okay.
So that's the amendment on the table. Any discussion to that? Go ahead.
So just because, so if the application deadline is June 26th, and then the application review has to be completed by June 23rd, we typically like to provide our grant review committee 2 to 4 weeks to review the applications.
June 30th.
So do you want to change that June 16th to like June 1st? On
Yeah,
line
maybe
102?
let's do that just to give us more time, because that review is really important in the process for awarding.
Are they able to get it in by then?
We'll
Because-
just have to start the competition earlier in the
Okay.
process.
Okay. It would be
Can
next,
we
it would
call-
be next.
Well,
year,
the
wouldn't it?
problem is with the motion on the table, it's now committee discussion. So it's a kind of puts us in an awkward, Vice Chair Cummins.
I'm
So
going to
if you'll go
speak
find out.
against. I'm going to speak against the motion. I'm not. I don't feel super strongly either way, but I just think it's opportunities to just allow grants to go out. I mean, we don't see all grants. Why are we seeing this one? Why, and so I think it's just, I don't think we need to have all of these awards come to the full board. And so I'm just going to vote no.
Thank you. I'm normally in favor of things going to the board, but if we have the process spelled out, I'm okay if we have it. So I would suggest, if this doesn't pass, that you really look closely at all the program requirements to make sure that that feels satisfactory to you. Any other discussion to this? I saw that Tracy wanted to talk. Is the board okay if I go ahead and invite, not Tracy, isn't that your name too? Tracy. Sorry. She was waving. No, I didn't, but it was Tracy. Is the committee okay if I go ahead and invite, even though this is a committee discussion now because the motion's on the table, if we make an exception since we had a visitor come in for this motion? Is that, without any objection, then we'll go ahead and invite Tracy to the table. And did you talk to Cindy? Okay.
Thanks so much.
Please
Tracy
introduce
Gruber, Utah Department of Workforce Services, Office of Child Care, and the advisor on the state's Intergenerational Poverty Initiative. So this issue overlaps with my duties. Just a quick comment about the timing. Schools need to get their programs up and running. So to the extent that if the board is going to review, just being considerate of that, if we issue funding and the funding isn't approved until August, we don't issue our additional supplemental funding to this grant until this decision is made, and it would really effectively delay the implementation of the programs, potentially January at the earliest, a full school year at the latest.
Thank you. I have a question. So the way that this body works is any changes we make today won't go into effect until after this is already done because of the process set up by the legislature. So for this year, it shouldn't, it would be following.
Well, the next application isn't until next
Not till
spring,
next
because these
spring.
are awarded
Okay.
in three-year cycles.
Okay.
And so we're talking, this rule actually won't be in effect until next spring anyway.
Well,
but-
even if this motion fails, should we change all the dates earlier? Then, if that's the problem, like to May and starting sooner so that we're not pushing up against the deadline?
I have a question.
Board Member
I
Davis.
mean, historically, it's grant recipients haven't been notified until August 5th. Has that caused a problem in the past?
No, the notification isn't the issue. It's just getting the entire process in place and up and running so that they know before the school year starts. So if the board doesn't approve
So August
until
5th works.
August, it works. It's a tight time frame. So if the applications are coming to the board for the approval first in August, it puts the schools in a difficult time frame, and we're waiting for this decision before we issue the supplemental funding.
I would suggest moving all the dates earlier. I
That's
just
fine.
think it's pretty late for people to plan.
Yeah, I would suggest, but
And
right
that's
now we
feedback I
have
just got
this
from
amendment on the table and then we can work on that,
On the dates.
on the dates. So I guess you could amend the dates because we're talking about the dates right now, but you'd probably need to do it again if this fails. Or you could split out the dates. Yes, that's what I'm saying is, but because it's part of this larger motion, if this fails, you could still work on the dates, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or if it passes, could you then, if it passes?
Yeah, we'd still have 2 more dates. We
Okay,
can
so
go-
can I call a
Let's
question?
call it.
Well, we probably should change the dates if this were to
Oh.
pass.
Let's just see what happens.
Okay.
If it passes, we can still change the dates.
Okay. So all in favor of calling the question?
Aye.
I'm going to vote no.
Oh, to call the question? Aye. Sorry.
Okay.
Where are we?
Are you an aye? Okay, that, everyone's tired. I can't get to votes.
I've got twitch in my eye. It's from the Student Activity Advisor Commission.
Okay, so,
Policy.
so we're going to go ahead and vote on the
Great stress.
amendment. I'm going to I'm going to restate the amendment, which is
last
on
one.
lines 93, 94, 95 to strike the words award grant funds to LEAs based on the recommendations of a program grant application review panel and add make funding recommendations to the board. And then also to reinsert lines 103 to 105 and to change the date to August 10th. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
No.
I'm going to vote no on this one also.
Okay.
And then, so now the original motion is on the table. Any amendments that could be proposed? We know we need some.
Dates.
Okay, let's try.
Board Member Lear?
Okay, I'd like to amend line 44 to say 200,000 instead of 150,000. And then amend lines, make amendments on lines, starting on line 102 to June 1st on line 102. July 1st, is that, or even earlier than June 1st?
I think we move May.
I think May, why don't you just change it to May 16th?
Let's do it as early as we
Do you want to do May 1st, applications due?
May 1st or May 15th?
May 15th.
May 15th
Okay.
on line 102. The review is supposed to be completed by, this gives you a little more than a month. So May 15th to June 30th, is that
So we
good?
don't actually need a date on that one. Now we just need the when they notify the grant
I'm
recipients.
sorry, right, and then notify no later than August 1.
Or July 1, probably.
do it earlier.
Funding starts July 1. That's typically the
why
LCIP.
don't we
Oh,
do July
then-
1?
Let's do July 1.
Then let's do July 1. So
Well-
it'll
What
be
do you want to do?
June.
Sooner.
So why don't you do July 15th?
Or June 15th, you mean?
Because we'd still be in
The
review.
funding's not in until,
Yeah.
Well, hold on.
Do May 15th.
May
This is
15th.
just notifying grant recipients that they're going to receive the
Right.
funding. It's not actually sending it out. So
But-
if the application comes to you on May
but
15th,
they have till June 30th.
But they need
Oh,
some
no,
time. to-
they don't anymore.
But they do
because you
need
don't
some
them.
time to complete the
We
process.
need time to complete the review process.
So,
so do you think July 1's too early?
I think we
that's-
can know
or should
by
we-
July 1.
is that a lot?
do you
That's
wanna
only
do
2
July
weeks. Is that
15th?
okay?
It's not, it's
May 6th, you changed it to May
yeah,
15th.
May 15th.
Would you rather
is when they're
do
due.
Oh,
mid-July?
that's fine, yeah.
And do mid-July?
I lied.
Or what do you
May
think?
15th, I just made that motion.
For the
Notification.
notification. I think if we can get as close to July 1 as possible, so that gives us flexibility. If we complete the review early, then we can absolutely let them know.
Well, then,
It's
But
no
we don't-
later than
No later than.
okay.
July
Ju-
1.
July 1.
Okay.
So no later than July 1 and May 15th on line 102.
For the due date.
And line 106 would say no later than July 1.
Okay, so
So-
is that all your amendment?
I'd like to insert on line 113, awarding of funds, OF, line 113. As long as I'm getting to the important things.
Okay, so the amendment on the table is on line 44 to change the allocation to 200,000, 100,000 to 200,000. And then on line 102 to change the deadline to May 15th, and then the notification to July 1, no later than July 1,
On 106.
on 106, sorry. And then on line 113 to insert of, and that's,
Those are my
those are the amendments. Any discussion to the amendment? I have a question. So the funding is available July 1st. Is there any situation where there could be a hiccup and you wouldn't be able to notify by July 1st? Or are you confident that, I'm just concerned when we say no later than.
We'll be able to notify, but then it's getting it into the Utah grants system.
Right.
So we will be able to send out notifications, by, phone calls, emails, but we're hopeful that it will get into the system because that's where the official award letter goes out that the local education agencies have to use to hire. Like I have money to hire this position for the social worker for after school.
Okay,
So
thank you. Any other questions or discussion on this amendment? Seeing none, the amendment is as stated. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion or that amendment passes unanimously. So now we're back to the original motion, which is to approve R277710 draft 1 as amended. Any discussion to that? Board Member Davis?
Before, it says the board sends the report. Is the board given the
What line?
awardees and the applicants?
119.
119, I think, is that what we said? 119, it says, it's necessary for the board's report to the Utah Intergenerational Welfare Reform Commission. The board's report, is that something that the board sees, and do we see who was awarded and who applied?
So the board's report, I guess I'm not sure who's done that. I know Sid attends, or Superintendent Dixon is part of the IGP or Intergenerational Welfare Reform Commission, is she not? But she may have a designee that attends, or, so I'm not sure who would actually present the report to them. It's
In the past, we've never been asked to present at the commission. We always are prepared. We have a evaluation of the after-school grant programs, and we always have that prepared, and we coordinate that through the policy office here. But we've never been asked, as of yet, to present it to the IGP Welfare Commission.
But this just says it's given. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to be presented. The information's provided.
It's discussed.
And what's included in the report? Just what you said, not the applicants and the recipients?
It would just be the progress of the applicants towards the goals of the grant program.
Okay.
Any other discussion to the motion on the table? Seeing none, we're going to go ahead and vote on approving R277-710 draft 1 as amended and recommend it to the full board for approval on second and final reading. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes unanimously. Thank you, and thank you for coming today.
Thank you.
Thanks for your help. It was nice to.
We're going to
Right
go
here to
back
ask.
to 5.3.
Oh, man.
And we will invite Jeff
I don't know.
and Kim
Let me ask.
Herrera
Maybe that's
to the
question.
table.
Ask. And they're mostly just wording changes.
This is school counselor direct and indirect services, and we'll go ahead and turn the time over to you. Make sure to introduce yourself again.
That's my problem. They'll let me. So I'm going to ask. Maybe I should.
Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay. Jeff Van Holten, Policy Advisor for the Board. I am going to start with this one just to give a little bit of context and background on several things so that as we have the discussion, we have all of the pieces before us as you make your decisions. So this rule is coming before you because of House Bill 81, which passed in this last session. It was passed by Representative Pulsifer. And the language of House Bill 81 reads, it's very brief, so I'll quickly read it. It says, no later than July 1st, 2019, the State Board shall make rules specifying the recommended direct and indirect services a school counselor may provide, the recommended amount of time a school counselor may provide on direct and indirect services, and recommended activities for a school counselor. And then no later than November 30th, the State Board shall report to the interim committee about the board's strategic efforts to address counseling services in schools. So that's how the bill reads. And so we created House R277464. There are two different. Yes, thank you, Carol, for the visual aid.
You have 3 drafts.
There are 3 drafts. The first draft was the original draft, and in a meeting with USSA earlier this week, we created draft 2 to clarify a couple of items. You'll see those in blue and red down on lines 43 and 44. And then we also have some additional recommendations from Board Member Lear that are found in green and purple on draft 3. The The primary difference between draft 2 and draft 3 is it takes the word recommended from the statute and places it starting up in line 32. So all of the things in draft 2 that are the LEA shall ensure are now saying the board recommends an LEA shall ensure. That was requested. I'll actually let board member here speak more directly to those requests, but that is the primary difference between these two. So draft 2 is a little more strict and black and white, and we have a softer version in draft 3 to reflect the language from the statute.
Okay, thank you. Before I accept a motion, I want to make sure that we don't miss public comment because I do have Sarah signed up. So do you want to come? Yeah. If you've seen all 3 drafts. Okay. And introduce yourself, please.
Hi, Sarah Jones with the Utah Education Association. Thank you to Jeff. We had a conversation about this rule yesterday. And I really just wanted to throw something out, and then maybe Michelle and Jeff can advise you what the best way to proceed is. But in reaching out to school counselors among our membership, one of the things we heard about the frustration of how time is used that's not these direct services is on testing. Administering AP tests or civics tests or standardized tests, those kinds of things. And so if there are other staff that can do that piece of it, is that reflected somewhere very clearly in those 15% of the time for the indirect services? I don't know if it's intended to be the administrative duties on line 44 or not, but that was the one particular piece Jeff and I talked about yesterday, is making sure that's really clear, because in the testing world we're in now, that is not something that necessarily is the highest need of the student services for counselors. That was my only comment.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Was there anyone else that didn't get a chance to sign up? Go ahead.
Thank you. Terry Shoemaker with Utah School Superintendents Association, School Boards Association. We had quite a long conversation in working on draft 2, and it all stemmed from the fact that we felt like, the direction of shall, 85 and 15 was more with words shall originally, and the idea with the third draft now changes it to read recommend, shall recommend, right? I think we like that better in addition to what's done in 2. I hear what Sarah was saying, and that is an issue for school counselors, but we also have, school counselors have lots and lots and lots of responsibilities in a school that are student service related. And yes, they spend time, many schools, working on assessments too, so they have these other responsibilities. And so what this is doing is moving the needle, in my opinion, in the way it should go towards, direct services that they should be doing. But if we try to mandate that everywhere across the state, particularly with our smallest high schools and junior high schools, we create problems and create real serious types of burdens for those small schools. So draft 2 or draft 3 seem to get it where I think we need to be. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other. Did you?
Yes, I would like to respond to some of the comments if you're
Yes,
okay with
please.
that.
Go ahead.
I want to talk about the historical perspective. Is this has actually been in place for a while through our program model, and what it is meant to do is protect our counselors' time so they're directly serving our students and impacting our student outcomes, and that's what we intend. To address the first question about where that testing is being called out in the rule is through non-counseling activities, as according to our model. So it is already listed in the model that is considered a non-counseling duty. And so in the definitions for non-counseling duties, it does address that. And then when you look at the time allocation, it talks about what direct and indirect services are. And so that's why we didn't include those non-counseling duties, because that wouldn't fit into that 100%. And so that's where that is addressed. Also, I want to talk about the word recommended in the bill. I just want to be very mindful that we're not getting away from the intent on where we place the word recommended. I feel right now in draft 3 that the board recommends the LEA. I'm worried that it's taking away from the intent. I feel the intent was tasking the board to define the recommended time allocation. And that is the 85-15. I think it's also directing us to define the recommended activities, which would be lines 36 through 38, which defines our role in programming, the collaborative classroom instruction, our developing plans for college or career readiness, dropout prevention, and with the social emotional supports. That is what those are our recommended activities. And so I feel like the placement of recommendation is taking away from the intent of the bill and not protecting our counselors in providing good services to our students. I also feel that Terry Shoemaker always brings up a great point, is now we have this question of compliance and how do we do that with no funding attached to it, right? And so that's a question I would like to work with you through today, but I really am concerned about where recommendation is placed right currently in draft 3. I do have a couple of other things I want to address, if that's okay.
Yeah, can I pause you for 1 minute
Yes.
just so Board Member Lyric can
Sure.
respond?
Trying to think, this is a circular discussion, so I'm trying to think where to start. My first choice would be, and if this is not urgent to pass today, would be because I had never thought of it exactly the way that Kim described it, but the other part of me says, this bill says recommended direct and indirect services, recommended amount of time. And there are many board members, and I've sometimes fallen on one or the other sides of this, who say if the law says this, then I don't think it's the board's prerogative to take a stricter approach or a less strict approach. And so I'm reluctant to take a more strict approach because there would be a fiscal note on this, should there be a more strict approach. I think it's wrong and unfair to do to the LEAs when the legislators decided the same thing. I don't want a fiscal note, so I'm going to go with recommended. But I do hear what you're saying in terms of some of the recommended words. So I personally think we would have a better rule, in addition to my many editing concerns, if we could wait 1 month. Is that possible? Does it?
So you would need to just make a motion to bring it.
Do we have to report on
So
this one?
the bill
November?
does say no later than July 1st, 2019, the state
Oh.
board shall make rule. So I don't know if that means rule
This
needs
is
to be into
quick.
effect or,
But we will have made the rule by June, and it just is not effective.
It wouldn't be approved by the board till August.
That's right.
Yeah.
Is that so? Does make rules satisfy that requirement?
The question is the risk of us being called up to administrative rules to say, you guys didn't meet your deadline of July 1.
Right.
Is there a reporting requirement for us to report the rule?
yes, so
And when's that?
November interim, we report
Okay.
on the board's strategies and efforts to address counseling
I-
services.
So if I can respond?
Well, what you could do is also make this,
Oh.
sorry, yes, you can respond. But really quick, I just wanted to insert a little bit because I can't raise my hand. I just get to start talking. But so real quick, what you could do is pass it, and then if you found more tweaks that you wanted to make by the next month, then you could do that. But it's
Yeah.
better to be done here, I agree, but if you're worried about the time. Board Member Lear.
I am just not, I do not like, and I know you made a great effort to kind of consider my concerns and the recommended word that's really in there, even between yesterday and today. I just really don't like rules that don't say what we mean and are not well written. And I would rather, because it's not me anymore, face the Administrative Rules Committee and say, we really struggled with recommended and we wanted to get it right. And if that is an eventuality. So my druthers would be to work harder at the recommended language and wait until next month.
Okay, I'm going to go to Board Member Davis and then Vice Chair Cummins.
I just have a question. How are we defining, and I think it could be argued either way, actually, how are we defining working with students on scheduling? Is that defined in direct or indirect responsibilities when we're working with students on schedules and scheduling?
So in our current model, scheduling is not defined as an inappropriate activity. And in speaking to a lot of counselors, you get a mixed review.
Sure.
A lot of counselors see that as a whole child approach to understanding students' needs. When a student comes in for a schedule change, it could lead in a whole different direction. That could lead into some more foundational skill building. So for example, if a student wants to come out in and change out of a teacher's class, and you start that further discussion and you find out maybe they're being bullied in that class or something. So I'm concerned about taking schedules away from counselors completely, because there is a portion of knowing that whole child and having every piece of the pie. But I do think there needs to be some balance, because they're like the first of school time, it's a really cumbersome process. But
Yeah,
I also worry about the unintentional consequences of saying that isn't a responsibility of the counselor, because it takes away from getting to know that child and having potential relationship building to lead into other supports that the child may need.
Can I ask a follow-up,
Yes.
Chair? So I guess what I want to know is, will that fit in the 85% or the 15%?
The
It's currently in
Schedule
85.
changes?
I think, isn't that what line 40 is? Essentially providing supports for students' needs consistent with the program?
and
But
then-
I think it's debatable. I think it can be argued either way, because some people see it as logistical and some people see it as,
another
like you said, dominoing into something more meaningful, perhaps.
Can I respond to that? I also think, too, we need to be very careful of, we're doing dropout prevention, and that's credits, too, and we don't want someone checking out of a class that is required for graduation, or if a student is working on a specific program like NCAA eligibility or the Regent Scholarship. We want very intentional connection to their four-year plan and those informed decision-making process with the student and the parent when they are making those big decisions. So there is, I think, a bigger conversation to that.
Okay, Vice Chair Cummins?
I'm going to speak in favor of putting this off for a month, because I think the recommend word, I think, is very important in this conversation. So we have been tasked as a board with making a recommendation, which is totally non-binding, and there's no teeth in any of this. It's just we make a recommendation, we say, here's what we recommend, but there's no accountability, and yet we're tasked with going back to the what committee? The education committee, ed interim committee, and talking about strategies that we've developed. And so I think we need to be very conscientious about how we use the word recommend, so that is it a strategy, or is it just we recommend? And so I think we need to be very careful about balancing those two responsibilities that we have, so that when we say we recommend, or this is a recommended time frame, I think those are two very different things. And so I think we ought to bring it back, balancing those two things.
Thank you. Sorry, I have a child texting me, and it's something that I have to answer. So I'm going to go.
Can I make a comment while you're doing that?
Well, I just would like someone, if we're going to recommend moving it, I need it to be more official than that.
Well,
Refer it back to next month's
Yeah.
committee. Good
I
to
mean,
know.
can I just make a comment?
Yes, please.
Every time we do that, we are pushing our schools back again. I mean, there are schools that are going to have to hire different people or different staff to do certain requirements that counselors were doing prior. I mean, I just feel like we need to be
I'll go
aware.
through every single one of the edits I have in the alternative. I mean, I'm fine about that. I just don't like sloppy rules. Nobody's fault. I just don't.
I don't like this whole. I love the intent of this
Oh,
law,
so do
but
I.
I don't like
I love that there's no money in it, and I'm frustrated that there's no money in it.
Okay. Vice Chair
I'm
Cummins?
glad you were distracted.
So my question on the timing is, this rule, we're here in May, it wouldn't pass full board till June. It wouldn't be effective clear after the hiring portion anyways, and so this wouldn't actually effectively go into effect for another school year as far as like hiring practices. Or would it go into
It's legally
effect at
binding.
at that point? You know, and so we're already past that hiring season, and so it's, what is the obligation of, well, I guess, never mind. There's no obligation, it's just recommended. So anyway, so maybe that's something to consider, because this is very soft rule. It really is. There's no anything that in it that says you shall do this. It's going to have to be a soft rule based on the legislation. I think it would be better to create that balance from what we're accountable for than to try and understand what it is, because it's soft. It just is. There's nothing that's going to be binding or LEAs are going to be accountable for, no matter
Except
what we
for
say.
being called on the carpet.
For what?
I'm just talking about the state board going up to the committee. That's the only thing. Yeah.
Can I share something to that as
Okay.
well? Oh,
Sorry, let me go to Angie and then we'll jump
Thank you.
over to you.
And I just want to throw this out because you all know I'm probably the biggest advocate of the board's power, probably almost more than most board members, which is ironic. But in addition to this legislation, you do have authority over, you have rulemaking authority. I do believe if you wanted to pass draft 2 and instead of saying recommend, say an LEA shall do this, you could do it. Now, whether or not, it's hard to know whether the administrative rules and the legislators are going to like draft 2 or draft 3, because I think that in conversations with the legislator who asked for this rule, they actually meant it to be much stronger than recommend, but that was the way it was drafted. But again, that's one person out of 104 legislators. And depending on the legislator, we could get called out for doing draft 3 and we could get called out for doing draft 2. So I think at the end of the day, as a board, it's up to you all to decide, do you want this to go out as a recommendation and be soft? Or would you want to do something like draft 2, which really sends more of a message? And if it does pass in August or goes into effect in August or September, legally, they would be required to ensure that their counselors, their job duties are balanced that way, that 85-15. I'm mostly laying that out to you because I'm not trying to say this is an easy call, because I think depending on the person you talk to, some people are going to favor the board taking a strong position on this, the way we have with school nurses, for example, where we've said there's a ratio. None of the LEAs are complying with it, but legally they're supposed to have, it establishes a standard of what the board thinks is the appropriate duty for that role, for whether it's nurses or school counselors, or we can do the recommend. So I don't want you to feel like you're only left with saying recommends, because I do think you have the authority to make it stronger if you'd like.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to go to Kim and then to Board Member Earl.
I just
And
realized I never introduced myself, and I apologize.
Yes.
My name is Kim Herrera, and I'm a school counseling program specialist. I also want to just be very conscientious, too, with Angie's point, that we're not creating loopholes or unintentional consequences, because as part of 462 that was just passed through full board, approved school counseling programs do need to follow our program model, and that is a tied to funding. And I don't want other programs not wanting to come on board because it is easier or a softer rule not to have to hold that accountability of providing services to students as well. So that's just another thing to consider if we have one rule in one area that's softer and then we have a different expectation and a different standard for the approved programs. So just another thing to consider. I do have a couple of other issues or concerns I have with some of the changes that, can I bring those up at this time, or would you like to hold off?
Yes, because nobody's made a motion to.
Okay.
If someone's going to make a motion to wait a month, then I'd rather we wait because we've got a lot still on the agenda, but so far I don't have that. Okay.
I move that we table this to our next committee discussion.
Okay. So is that okay with you? So the motion on the table is to table this until next month's committee discussion. Any discussion to that motion?
Yeah, my comment's
Go ahead.
relevant to that. I think schools are already aware of these numbers, and the idea that they're waiting for a rule to come out to maybe be thinking about them just isn't, I don't think that's the case. I think they're already aware of the numbers. I think they're already making recommendations, or it's on their mind, I think, even when the law was passed. So I think it would be appropriate to wait a month and really delve into this and, get it right, so to speak, or at least better, So I think that's a completely appropriate thing. And once again, I think the accommodations, they're already aware of this. They're already probably striving for the best compliance, so.
Okay. Any other discussion to this motion? Board Member Lear? Go ahead.
I support the motion. I wish we could do this faster, but I think it's really important to not send, to the extent possible, because I understand the difference between the funding for programs in 462 versus the program standards in 464. But I don't want to send additional mixed messages of now the board is piling on and we neither are giving you additional funds. And for some LEAs, it's literally impossible to do this. So we would also want to take out the penalties at the end in draft 2 if we stayed with draft 2. So I think there are many, many good reasons for amending this and working a little harder on putting the recommends word in the right place.
Any other discussion to the motion? Okay, seeing none, all in favor of tabling this rule until next month?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes unanimously. Kim, if you want to talk with individual board members, and board members, please reach out so as much as we can kind of hone in on the language and then have the public dialogue about it, but it would be good to have some of those discussions beforehand. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to, is this one related? 5.5, is that the model policy? Or am I thinking of something different? Oh, that's 5.7.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to move on to 5.5, which is R277-305, Leadership Preparation Programs. And is it Travis? Is Travis and Ben? Okay, thank you. I couldn't see you. Please introduce yourselves and.
Ben Rasmussen, Director of Law and Professional Practices.
Travis Rawlings, Educator Licensing Coordinator for the board.
Thank you. If you'll go ahead and.
I'll just go ahead.
Defer to you.
Okay. So, hello again, as we get into every month. The rule before you is a rewrite of the program guidelines for approved programs in school leadership. And I am going to use the term school leadership. That's a new term. I'll explain that in a moment. But so this went through our normal rule process that we've been using for licensing. We had the work of the leadership task force that reported to the board in December, and then we held a couple focus groups with principals, universities, principal supervisors, those type of positions, and we created a draft of the rule and put it out for a month, and now it is before you. So the key aspects of this is really about the rebranding. I think a lot of the questions, the issues that have been brought to my attention really talk about why are we now saying, okay, we keep changing the name of this license. It goes from admin to education leadership, and now you want to call it school leadership. And there's a rationale document that accompanied the draft to the public that kind of explains it, and I'll give you just a quick version. And that is, we as a state have been using administrative licensing as an incredibly broad stroke in all of our districts, all of our charters, well, not all the charter schools, but charter schools districts have been just using this for almost anything. And ultimately, it's being used in a way that really is outside of the realm of what a license can really mean. I cannot tell you how many times I have had a district call me trying to get an individual an administrative license to comply with their own policy. That happens way more often than it should. It's this idea that this admin license is this magic ticket to being a director of special ed or a CTE director, when the reality is these preparation programs and what they're intended to do is prepare a person with the skills and knowledge to lead a school, to work as a vice principal, as a principal in a school. That's the intention. And so rather than pretending this is something that's broader than that, this rebranding is intended to say, no, this is school leadership. And you, district or charter school, if you want to require this for your superintendent, if you want to require it, if you think it's beneficial for your director of special ed to have this license, then so be it. But that's not what our intention as the board, or your intention, I should say, is that this license is intended to target skills and knowledge of working in a school. The other aspect of this that comes up is teacher leadership. Because one of the things, when we changed the name to education leadership, the thought at the time, this was 2016, was that we would then kind of roll together school leadership and teacher leadership. That's why they wanted to go to the broader term. But what we found is that just like education leadership is too broad of a term and too nebulous, teacher leadership is as well. Now, I can define teacher leader roles, such as instructional coach, student teacher mentor, new teacher mentor. All of those roles can be defined, and the skills and knowledge necessary for those roles can be defined, but teacher leadership is too broad. So what we want to do is we want to, brand this, if you will, as school leadership, and then teacher leadership, it will be a series of endorsements. In fact, we've created our first one that we're going to have some individuals that we're working with Granite School District, the University of Utah, that will have an instructional coach endorsement. And similar to our reading endorsement, these endorsements will not be required by the state for anything, but if a district wants to require it, they can. So as I said, reading endorsement is the big example for this. Many districts will require a reading endorsement for a reading specialist, but we as a state do not enforce that or require that. It's a local requirement. So ultimately, the only other aspect I wanted to touch on in this is it does eliminate something that is in line with all of our other rules that we've been changing. It eliminates the intern hours. There is still a required clinical experience. There are still required tasks and competencies that the individuals must meet and demonstrate, but there is no longer an arbitrary number of hours that must be met. That is no longer in there. So with that, the last thing I will say is that we did not receive a lot of public feedback on this. I did receive some. There was some feedback from UEA that I'll let them address. But ultimately, for the most part, I got no comments. I got like 5, to be honest.
Okay.
A month, so.
Thank
There you
you.
go.
We do have Sarah signed up, but she had to step out. Tracy, can you address? Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I think most of the comments were minor in nature and things that we got too late to be able to incorporate into the draft for you that will likely bring some things forward. But they're very minor. The one thing that they kind of talked about was whether or not these preparation programs need to be a university or not. So it's not clear in this rule. It doesn't specifically say university-based program. But when you tie this to R277-301, where it talks about in order to be an approved program, that's everything except for elementary and secondary have to be university-based. So as of right now, even though it's not explicit in this rule, because of the tie to the other rule, this would have to be a university-based program. Now, whether that's what you want or not, that's how it's currently written. So.
Thank you. Any discussion, Board Member Lear?
Yes, I have a number of changes I'd like to propose that are somewhat substantive, some are clarifying, but before I start that, I don't know if you want me to wait till toward the end to do that? Or...
Well, I think what we should do is what Vice Chair Cummins modeled is make a motion to adopt the draft and then start amending the draft instead of
Okay,
doing
then-
it backwards.
Then I'll make that motion to adopt this draft for discussion.
Okay, so draft 1.
Yes.
Okay, so the motion on the table is to adopt R277-305 draft 1 dash, all this, sorry, threw me off like I said draft. Draft 1 to send to the full board for approval on second and final reading. Any discussion to that motion?
Then can I continue for a few minutes?
Yes.
I won't go through every single thing right now, but I first had a question to Travis about how you came up with this list of things that an administrator should have. Did you sit down with some stakeholders?
So that's a very good question. And so where the core of that list came from was back in 2016, where we sat down with university preparation programs, some superintendents, some principals, and we came from. Most of this rule didn't drastically change. It really was. A lot of those statements have just been tweaked to fit into the model of what we're trying to accomplish now. The leadership standards were recently changed by the board. You adopted new leadership standards, I believe it was last year. And so we also looked at them from that lens. And again, that would have been with our focus groups that we held before we wrote the public draft.
Thank you for that. I'll wait to hear other comments.
Okay.
And then I'll raise mine line by line.
Okay, Board Member Earl?
So I guess my question is, higher ed, what role do they have in this? Is this affecting them at all, or is this just us? Does this have an impact on their programming, or is this just us?
So the feedback that I did get feedback from 2 university programs on this. I believe that because this is not drastically different than the current rule, I think they're seeing it as an opportunity, again, with the internship hours and things. So it will have impact on them and how they practice, but it's a direction that, for the most part, it sounds like from the minimal feedback I got, that's the direction they want to go. That's the best I can say.
I just, based on what we've had happen earlier this year, I just really would like more feedback from them before we proceed with something that's going to actually impact them. And it sounds like it will, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is a direct impact on them. If there's maybe a more direct way to reach them, I know.
I unfortunately can't force them to respond, but you're right. I mean,
No,
I
you
can reach out
can't.
more. So.
Well,
But I feel like there are meetings where,
You could specifically invite them to a meeting.
or.
They hold meetings with the Utah Council of Education Deans, the Utah Accreditation Council. We meet with them. We've had direct conversations with UCEL, which is the Council on Education Leadership, which would have all of them on there. So while I understand completely what you're saying, if we had some faculty member come out of the woodwork and say they weren't even aware of any of this, I'd be shocked, but I couldn't prove that to you. I don't have the documentation
Well, it's not
to prove it to anything.
I just want to,
I know what you mean.
well, and I mean, we always want as much public feedback. I think that there still needs to be continued effort to communicate more effectively, but not just the communication piece, but communicate our process, because a lot of people think that that time to speak is up when we reach certain milestones. And just as a reminder, if this were to pass out of committee today, we have this month until it goes to the full board, and then it has to go out for a public comment period before it's enacted until by the Administrative Rules Committee. And so there's still a lot of time for public feedback, and as board members, we also can do everything we can to facilitate communication with the public. So, okay. Board Member Davis?
Just to make sure I'm understanding, the only thing that this does really is to take away the 400-hour requirement. It still keeps kind of a competency requirement as determined by the university administrative preparation programs. And if they want to have an internship hour requirement in their programs, they can. But we are not saying they all have to follow our 400-hour, whether their applicant they feel is competent at 50 hours or 400 hours, everybody has to do 400 hours. That's the only thing this is changing. Is that correct?
I'm not certain that I'd say that's the only thing, but I would say that that's the major change. I think the other things are minor in nature, such as before in the rule, it was a list of things you had to do in your internship. Now it's just a list of competencies you need to demonstrate. The other major thing might be that it is similar to when we did 304 on teacher preparation. It talks about that those clinical experiences need to be throughout the program, that it's not just about that internship, that there needs to be clinical experiences in schools throughout the program. That'd be the other major.
It's really a change. Can I make a follow-up comment, Chair? I'm going to take that as a yes. So it seems like the change really is a change from meaningful experience requirements, or a change to meaningful experience requirements from clock in your hours.
Yes.
Okay.
Board Member Lear, is your light on for?
I don't think it's, no.
Okay. Well, it looks like no one else has anything, so it'd be an appropriate time for you to, Board Member,
Okay.
sorry, Superintendent, real quick, Superintendent.
Okay, did you?
Sorry, I'm going to turn it over to Superintendent.
That's
and then
great.
Back to
No problem.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to a little bit in the delay in feedback. I think it was a really appropriate question that you asked, Board Member Earl. As Travis stated, Coordinator Rollins, to be so official, we have really been working on this for a couple of years now with both the deans and those who lead preparation programs. And I think it's always a challenge. We learned this from the prior rule that we meet with deans and we assume that they're getting feedback, and sometimes those that they're closest to right in their department gives them feedback, but then there are ancillary players from various colleges that don't always give the feedback or know about the changes. And those are some of the people that we heard with in the teaching rule. In this case, the folks who are directly working with leadership preparation have been involved in this for the past couple of years. There have been a few changes in personnel, but the main players have been at the table. So I just want to give you that perspective that there has been a ton of feedback and work, and the changes that you're making, some of the tweaks where they've said, well, this word or that word, but the concepts in here have been really collaborative. And in fact, they have asked us to move forward on some of these things so that it gives them a lever to change some of their practices. And specifically, I know when we were looking at an assessment, and the practices in a different assessment that they wanted to use did not align with our prior rule. And our rule was more seat time based instead of competency based. So they're really trying to help us help them move forward. And I just want to make sure, I think that Travis articulated that, but I've kind of stepped in and out of those conversations, but they've been going on for a couple of years with everybody at the table. And I think they would be concerned if we continue to delay to say, can we get more input? So we could find out how they feel about it, maybe do a survey and give you that. But I would caution this committee in at least not pushing it through to the entire board, and then we can give you some information between now and then if that would help on kind of how they've done outreach to everybody on their staff. I think we know where their leadership is in each institution.
Thank you. Are you okay if I go to, before we start all the amendments?
One question,
Sure.
the
Vice
superintendent's comments. Thank
sure.
you. Sorry.
Yes.
So was the school leadership task force of the board part of articulating some of the recommendations for this? Okay, so they were part of that feedback. Thank you.
That's helpful information. Thank you.
Okay. Board Member Lear.
Okay, and it might be, some of these questions are questions for Travis. Would it be okay if we can just have a conversation?
Yeah, it's fine.
If things don't get out of hand?
Well, I think it would be nice if we started the amendment process
Okay.
that
then
you
I'll-
have and ask
But
questions.
some of my amendments go to an
That's
answer
fine.
we can
Yeah,
get
right.
from
Go ahead.
So on line 29, a master's degree or more advanced degree in any field, archaeology, law.
Yes, My light's on. Okay. The intention was that it's a demonstration of academic success, kind of like we've talked about in the standard license. So
Yep.
any degree that's
what you
considered master's or on. Yep.
Okay. On line 32, it should be a small little I after the C.
Oh.
Line
That one
36.
doesn't have to be.
Line 36, prior to being awarded, is it important to say Utah School Leadership License or?
You're not looking at the same one. I'm so sorry. I'm
It's all
sorry.
right.
Go
No,
ahead.
no, don't worry about it. On line 36, would it be important to say Utah School Leadership License? Or is it-
Angie has a response to that.
I think, I mean, we don't have jurisdiction over school leadership license areas of concentration for any other state, so I think it would
Okay.
be without.
No, end of discussion.
Okay.
I just need, most of these are just yes, no questions, and if I need to be convinced, I'll tell you.
Thank you.
How's that? Line 38, shall have completed, at the end of the line there.
Wait.
Line 6.
Hold on one second. So shall have completed because it's something that they have to have done.
Yes.
Oh, I see.
Well, it
what you're
does say
saying.
prior to being awarded.
So, but
they
then it
shall
says
complete.
prior.
They shall have completed rather than shall complete. They have to be done with it in order to apply.
But
Line-
I've seen
line
it worded
6
this way a lot.
Line 63,
Okay.
collaborating with all I don't ever like all. You never know.
Right.
It's just getting rid of that, all.
That one would likely be substantive
Sorry,
that you want to make
what
a
line
motion
was
on.
that one?
Line 63,
Can you repeat it so that Angie can hear?
just delete all,
On which line, sorry?
63.
63, okay.
It is really hard to find all of them.
Yes,
There might
that's
be a
good
stakeholder
point.
group you missed.
Yeah, agreed. That's a good
Line, here's, and this is a little bit of somewhat of a more substantive discussion. I am increasingly impressed that the new flavor of the month is problems with special ed. And that is addressed primarily at the administrative level, and I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon. I think Utah was 10 years behind the curve, and we're
she's here.
now
But I don't know.
having the same problems other states have. I would like to, and rather just say, and rather than
line?
saying on line 75, line 75, rather than saying, understanding the laws and legal ramifications surrounding school leadership decisions and practice, and including application of the IDA, I would rather have that be number 9, understanding the laws and legal ramifications in school, including school leadership decisions and practices, semicolon, and then make a separate, understanding the requirements and LEA responsibilities of IDEA. A new 10, new little 10.
Can you restate that?
Yes, I will. Line 75 again.
And I got just
Ish.
what the new language would be,
The new,
understanding.
here's what I had, a new 10, understanding the requirements and LEA responsibilities of IDEA.
Okay.
So then you have to renumber from B.
Yes, and then renumber going,
Angie,
Yeah.
make sure to give me that after we're
Yep.
done. My draft is kind of off here.
Okay, so that one's, do you want to make that one an official amendment? Because that one's more, the rest of them were technical changes.
yes, I'd like to make that an amendment.
Okay.
Non-sub
Do you
versus
want,
sub.
can we do that one separately, or do you need to?
I don't think you'll have any problem with some of the rest of them.
Okay,
I mean, if there's any that you want to split out, tell me, but we might as well do
Okay,
them
go
all at
ahead.
once, if possible. Line 86. I think you need to cite the background check citation. Put the background check citation there.
Okay.
Do you mean the statute or the rule?
The statute or the rule, something
Either
that
one.
tells them what kind of a background check is required.
Yeah.
Line
We'll get it.
87, hold a current Utah professional educator license.
Sorry, which line again?
87.
87, thank you.
Can
I have a
respond to that
question.
one?
Yes, go ahead, Trevor.
So the intention, so this is to enter a program.
Right.
They would have to have a current license in order to receive it, to complete it. But the intention is sometimes what happens, and this happens to us in ARL all the time, somebody comes in with an expired license and they want to start working on a program, so we let them start, but what we tell them, look, up front, you've got to renew your license before you can officially finish. That was why I worded it that way.
Okay.
But it's an arguable point. Certainly.
I would be troubled if a person, I can see allowing the updating at the same time, but I would be troubled if a person were ever to receive a leadership license without having a current education.
I should add one more thing as well. This was one of the pieces of feedback that I hadn't shared because this has come up in the past numerous times. And that is WGU gave specific feedback regarding this line to request hold a Utah professional educator license or the equivalent in another state because of the way they operate in other states. And quite frankly, the board has changed on how much it does or doesn't want to support WG in that. So I didn't bring it up, but if you're going to say current, that locks that in even more, so you may want to consider that.
I personally don't have a problem with the equivalent in another state.
If I have a problem with neither, so
Okay.
yeah, whatever you want.
Okay, I'm going to go to Vice Chair Cummins because she wanted, before we move on to another.
My question was about what you were just talking about, which was so currently, if you have an expired license, so if you're doing something else and your license expires, one of the ways that you can renew your license is through the points you gain from getting a master's degree. And so I would worry that would exclude.
Don't need to, I agree.
Okay.
I don't disagree. I just don't want you to finish the program without a current license.
So is that going to be?
No, thank you.
No current.
Unless you'd like to do it for WGU.
I'm willing to trust the system to say you don't get to finish without a current license. The amendment I would personally support, or the equivalent of a license from another state.
I'm certain WGU would appreciate that support.
I think we're to the point we need these people. And if that facilitates that, I think that's a great idea. So I would propose an amendment on line 87 that says, hold a Utah professional educator license or a professional, a leadership, what's the best terminology?
I would recommend or the equivalent from another jurisdiction.
Okay.
Or an equivalent license from another jurisdiction.
Right. Thank you. Line 99, it says established guidelines. Do we mean standards or do we mean guidelines?
I got to think on that for a second. I'm sorry. I think it was intended as guidelines because they are established by the program. And so we didn't want to force the program to have its own standards to allow them to have guide. It's looser, but it's them establishing it, and that's why.
So it's the
program establishes
may
those
waive
guidelines.
the entrance requirements through based on program established. Okay, as long as it's enforceable by us. I mean.
Well, ultimately, those guidelines would be defined by them. So what we would be enforcing is that they're not using those guidelines for more than 10% of an incoming cohort.
Okay, all right, that makes sense, the way that's. Line 116, so no amendment there. Line 116, I think we have a new term for school improvement plan, do we not?
UEA's feedback included adding the TSSA plan, so maybe that's likely a change that should be made.
Okay,
Do you want to do that?
that's the new term.
Oh, I see.
Can we use the acronym, or should we spell it out?
Teacher and student success, of an LEA's Teacher and Student Success Act plan.
Line 117. I think what you're intending to say, and correct me if I would delete walkthroughs and say performing formal and informal, or vice versa, informal and formal classroom observations for the purpose of improving instruction.
I think that phrasing is probably better. I agree. It eliminates a methodology and puts it back into the, yeah, I would agree with that.
Plus, I'm not a fan of
Yeah, I understand.
slang. Line 120, appropriately handling cases of student discipline. Kind of the second problem flavor of the month.
I can't argue against that one.
And then last one, you'll be happy to know, line 135, provide all school administrators, I think you mean, right, not just principals, is that right?
Yes, because vice principals would be intended to be included.
And I think you could say to collaborate, with opportunities to collaborate across you LEAs.
Just take out with
Right,
each other. Yeah,
with
you
each
could.
other,
Yeah, you
just
could.
across LEAs. So line 134, line 135, provide all school administrators, not just principals, to collaborate across LEAs.
Board Member Davis?
I just don't know about that one because it has a shall. And typically,
Thank you.
I mean, typically our principals are kind of setting the vision and now we're having we're kind of forcing them. Our vice principals have to go out and collaborate with other vice principals. I don't know. Maybe you can
Travis?
help me. with that
So
one.
I think, yeah, the shall actually applies to the superintendent. The superintendent shall implement a network for them to do this. So it's really, we're not saying they have to use the network, we're saying the superintendent has to create the network. That's what the shall is.
And opportunities, I guess. So
Exactly.
So if that's something that's too onerous, then do you think it is?
I mean, yeah, I would take out the opportunities. I mean, if a network's there and they want to do it, fine. But to say you have to have all your vice principals collaborate with across LEAs, it seems, and all of them.
But it's just allowing them the opportunities. They're creating the opportunities.
It's not allowing. It's
No, they have to create
all.
the opportunities which they have to, which they shall allow. Is that too
I think
much
it
to
is.
expect?
I think it is.
So you would rather have it read how?
I mean, if this is an important concept to keep in there, I think then let's keep it in there for the principals.
Okay.
But all of the administrators, I
Is
just
that
think
too much
it's
to
too
expect?
much.
That's helpful information. I guess Terry has some thought.
I would encourage the committee to see what Terry wants to say about that, because the network is definitely something that is
The
more
network's
LEA-based.
fine, but not force them all to do it.
But it
So-
doesn't, they're not forced.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Sounds like it.
Please introduce yourself.
Yes.
there we go. Terry Shoemaker with Utah School Superintendents and School Boards Association. So we looked over this rule, and we're fine with the way it's written right here, but I do understand the question. I do understand what Board Member Davis is trying to say here. A superintendent works hard to create a network amongst their administrators because you want them to be collaborating with each other. That's a leadership principle that a superintendent should be doing on a regular basis, and also not only making sure they have a network, but that they're actually using that network. So I don't have any problem with the language as it exists right now, because I think that's an important leadership principle for superintendents. So I don't know if that fits what you're asking me, but
I have a thought, and maybe Terry could
Go ahead.
help with this as well. What if it said the superintendent shall implement a network for principal support?
that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We can.
I like that.
And frankly, the administrative portion of that, I would have been fine with that too, if you'd have left the word administrator in there. But more particularly, the principals, when you're in the role of principal, folks, you don't know what it's like to be principal until you're put in the role as principal. You could be assistant principal for 25 years. You will feel a major difference when you move from assistant principal to principal. Just like when you move from assistant superintendent to superintendent. When the buck stops with you, you know the difference. And so I'm very comfortable with school principals, but you understand having administrators talk to each other is also very, very important.
That was my initial thought, but I'm also more comfortable with less specificity. So a network for principal support or administrative.
fine.
Principal support, let's just leave it at that would be my druthers.
Vice Chair
So end
Cummins.
it there, is that what you're?
I would suggest.
Thank you.
But let's see.
So my question, if we were to end it there, the one thing that's different about the next sentence is that it talks about, it addresses across LEA boundaries, where is, what was the purpose of having that? Was that a direct recommendation from?
It was
a
a
task force?
recommendation from the task force report back in December to have, because as Superintendent Terry Shoemaker,
Hey, you have been sitting in meetings for.
no, I haven't. As he was saying, you want this to occur, but if you're Duchesne School District, it's very difficult. And so part of the recommendation from that task force was for the state superintendent to take the responsibility to try to help link them together. That's where this language came from.
So big ass superintendent is state superintendent.
Yes, this is state
Not
superintendent.
superintendent, it's the
Okay.
state superintendent.
Because I was going to.
So it,
Go ahead.
sorry, understanding the big S, then it would imply that it's going to be across LEAs because she's not
So you
going to
could-
create LEA specific networks, or he or she. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Davis.
I guess I'm just looking for clarification. I mean, I've been an assistant principal, I've been a principal, and I get the need for collaboration. I just worry about forcing, because certainly if a district superintendent wants to, I think a network would be great. I think opportunities are great, but to have them all and to do it on a state level, is that what our superintendents want? That our state superintendent creates this situation?
Nobody has to.
You don't have to participate. She creates it.
And then they participate as they choose.
Y'all come or not.
Can I
Go
respond
ahead.
to her
Seem
question?
optional in the reading, but maybe it's just me.
So to answer to your, Terry Shoemaker again, with superintendents and school board associations. So Board Member Davis, the opportunity to have principals speak with each other across districts is highly regarded by principals. BYU, in their BYU Public School Partnership, and UVU in their K-16 Alliance and other alliances do that on a regular basis, and they find that to be incredibly valuable. So if the state superintendent is able to pull this off and make this work, I think you'll see that it's going to produce benefits across the state.
I mean, I agree. I don't have a problem with that philosophically at all.
How is it?
I totally agree.
Yeah.
I just don't want
You need to make sure to talk in your mic, please.
I'm done talking about this. I'm fine with it. I agree 100% philosophically. I just wondering why our local superintendents can't coordinate this anyway, but I guess we need our state superintendent to do it, and that's fine.
Well,
As long as it's just optional, and that's
right.
how we go.
That's the way this is. We are doing this anyway. Local superintendents, when I came the first time, I thought we were referencing local superintendents. Then when you clarified that it's the state superintendent, that changes the language, or that changes the intent, but still you get the same benefits if it happens at the state level or at the district level.
Okay, last thing. I did say I was done talking, but I do think if it's at the state level, then it's important to keep it as principal and not all administrators, because that's going to be up to principals and local superintendents how they want to divide out all their assistants.
I liked the word network. That, I don't remember, was that your recommendation? Or someone recommended adding?
It's in there. in the implement a network.
Oh, network.
For
Sorry, I
principal
guess it was
support.
already there.
I think you might be referring to when Board Member Lear stopped it at principal support, where it
Right.
period, and deleted the rest.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that would certainly, we would certainly still be able to work with that. That'd be just fine.
I was suggesting shall implement a network for principal support.
Period.
Dan.
Yeah.
And those were my recommended changes. And you can
Thank you.
split them out if you want, or vote on all of them if you want, or.
So hopefully Angie can tell me where things actually weren't an amendment or were. Okay, so the proposed amendments on the table are, so that the technical ones I don't need to do, right?
Yeah, those two, no. Well,
The
yeah.
first page is skipped.
Yeah.
Okay, so on line
63.
63 to remove all. And then line 76 to put a semicolon after practices and then add a new 10 that says understanding the requirements and LEA responsibilities of IDEA semicolon and then renumber after that. And then on line 87, not 6.
Hold a
Yes.
a colon.
So hold a colon, little I, Utah professional educator
Your
semicolon
license.
or
License.
license.
Sorry.
Utah professional educator license
Or-
semicolon or little double I equivalent out of state license semicolon.
And then there's actually, do you want me to read that?
Yeah, and
And
then
then on line 86, it would say, clear a USBE fingerprint background check described in colon, and we have a little I, the statutory reference, and two little I, the board rule reference.
okay.
Okay.
And then on line 116 after of the, but that doesn't make sense to say. Okay, of a teacher and school, sorry, of a school's teacher and student success act plan or and
That should be an and.
and school and trust plan.
Yeah.
Okay, and then on line 120 or is this 119?
It's 120.
120 adding appropriately before handling. And then
117.
Oh, what
we
was
don't have it.
117? I
Yeah,
didn't have it.
117 was the perform classroom observations for the purpose
Oh,
of improving.
informal.
Yes.
Formal and informal, and crossing out walkthroughs.
Okay, so performing classroom observation,
No.
Formal and-
informal and
Yeah,
Informal and formal.
classroom observations, and then cross out walk through. I can't read it because Angie's hands are low, but it's fine.
Here we go.
Okay, and walkthroughs for the purpose of improving instructions. Okay, and then on line 134, I'm just going to read the whole thing. The superintendent shall implement a network for principal
period,
support period,
And then strike the rest.
and then strike the rest.
Of 134 and 135.
134 and 135. And then in line.
That's it.
Okay, thank you. So that's the amendment on the table.
That's right.
Any discussion to the amendment?
I think we've had really good discussion while we've been doing this. Thank you very much for involvement.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so now the motion on the table, so that passes unanimously. The motion on the table is to approve R277-305 Draft 1 as amended on first and what
And recommend.
recommend for approval to the board on second and final reading. Sorry, I was reading and translating what I needed to say. Any discussion to that motion?
Question.
Yes.
On line 32, it says recommendation from a board-approved school leadership preparation program. Do we have a list of board-approved school leadership preparation programs, and where would we find that?
We don't currently publish a list, but we do have such a list. The intention would be that any program that gets approved under 303 would be included in that language. But I can give you the list if you need it. I've actually got two universities that have recently been proposing.
Should we reference it?
Or 303.
I would suggest that that's not a rule. You don't want to list specific universities
I
in
just
a
meant
rule.
to ref.
But we should.
Where
Well,
do-
what does it mean then? How do you
approve.
define it?
Available from the licensing director at the USBE or?
Well, or we could
It's,
say-
I'm confused because a board-approved preparation program is defined in 303.
So we don't need to.
we could just put on the end of 33, pursuant to the process described in our
That was actually probably a really
That's
good
what I
idea.
mean by
Yep,
reference.
Yep, yep.
I suppose Cindy's asking because if somebody wanted to know.
How do you know which ones they are?
Travis makes it up or is it
Right.
really
Right.
someplace legitimate?
That's valid.
Okay, do you want to make that an official amendment? You don't have to reword it, I can do that.
I move that we amend line 32 of R277-305 draft 1 to include the board rule.
So after program put, or pursuant to the, I don't
No,
say
it's
or.
not or. So
Sorry, program, and then put pursuant to the process described in R277-303.
Yep.
Okay, so the amendment on the table is to add the stated language on line 33. Any discussion to that amendment? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
we should probably do the same here. Just
Okay.
insert the same language.
Okay, I'm going to recommend that we insert the same language on line 41 after preparation program. So the amendment on the table is to add pursuant to the process described in R277-303 on line 41. Any discussion to that amendment?
Yes.
303,
Yeah. So
in
line
305,
41.
but,
No. So we're just inserting this language twice. Right here. It's going to go here.
the rule is 305, but we're referencing 303.
Yeah.
Okay, any discussion to that amendment? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? That motion or amendment passes unanimously. We're back to R277-305 draft 1 being recommended to the full board
As amended.
as amended for approval on second and final reading. Any discussion to that motion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. That motion passes unanimously. We're going to move to 5.6, which is R277-522, entry years enhancement for quality teaching level 1, Utah teachers and admit. And that is Angie, is that you?
Ben and Travis.
Ben and
I'll
Travis,
take care of
sorry. I hadn't flipped the page yet.
So one of the things that my staff has been dealing with a lot is what's happened is we're going through this transition. Our universities informed some of their people that were enrolled that weren't going to graduate until this change that, oh, you won't have to take the Principles of Learning and Teaching test, what's commonly referred to as the PLT, which is true. They won't because it'll be the new system. And those those current students talk to their friends who were recent graduates and saying, oh, you don't have to do that anymore, but that hasn't happened yet. And so we got all this question about how does this transition with the Principles of Learning and Teaching test, which is an assessment that costs money. I mean, it's $150 that they have to take to upgrade to level 2. How does that process, who has to take it, who doesn't, how does this work? And so we went through this very carefully trying to figure this out. But ultimately, what this amendment does is it makes it clear, it draws a line. And so if you're on the wrong side of the line, you're on the wrong side of the line. If you're on the right side, you're on the right side. But it had to be drawn somewhere. So what it's at the very end, it says, an individual holding a current level 1 license on January 1, 2020. So remember, that's the January before we start implementing, may be upgraded to a level 2 license without completing the requirements of blah. And what it's referring to is, that's the reference for the PLT. So what that means, so if my license is expiring this year and I need to upgrade, I need to pass that test in order to upgrade. But if my district is going to recommend me after January 1, 2020, I can be upgraded without it. And so that's telling those people who are going into expiring next year, if you haven't taken it already, you don't need to take it because your district will be able to recommend you without it. This was one that was urgent enough that we wanted to bring it, because it is a small change. It's a sunset rule that we try to do in the off months. But this one is so urgent because a lot of these teachers take this test during the summer. We wanted to get this in front of you as quickly as we could. So that's what this rule is, or this change is.
Thank you. Any discussion or motions?
PLT.
Board Member,
It's the praxis is a.
let's make sure we ask the
Praxis is
questions
a-
on the mic if we can.
So the question is, what is the PLT? And the PLT is one of the praxis tests. The praxis is a series of tests administered by ETS. Principles of Learning and Teaching, there are actually 4 different tests, and individuals right now have to pass one of those 4 to upgrade to level 2. That's been established in rules since 2003.
Board Member Davis?
I'm just going to throw this out here at this moment, and it might be irrelevant, but it's something to think about for future meetings, and it has to do with this. So we just learned in our national conference that the national pass rate of the praxis is 46%. And I've been interviewing my students, and they're taking praxis up to 5 times each. So just to pass, because certain pieces of the praxis are so random in the questions that they ask. And it's cheaper to pay for all of the sections of the praxis again than just to pay for 2. I'm going to stop right there and just say this is something for us to think about for the future and how we're moving forward with all of this. And I'm interested in data statewide. How many times are our people having to take this over and over and over? How much are they paying? And will that change any of our requirements in the future? And I'll just end there, but it's something for everybody to think about.
I have that data.
Board Member Lear?
Can I add to that request then that if you're able, and tell me if these data are available, are you able to tell us not only how many times are they taking it over, but is it because of a technicality, or is it because of a single section, or is it because of failing the whole thing? Are you able to break that answer down at all?
On an individual level, yes. On a statewide level, kind of.
Break it down to the extent possible,
yes,
could we say that?
Absolutely.
Would that be helpful?
Literally, I could give you the pass rate on any test that we require on the first attempt in 5 minutes. I could tell you that.
I think.
Next time. Yep, absolutely. Yep.
And as far as I'm concerned, the big number doesn't help me, but if you can give me more information,
I'll do the best I can.
I think that would be helpful.
I will do the best I can.
Vice Chair Cummins?
Could you clarify for us, after 2020, what role the praxis will play in any of this, if at all?
So when you say the praxis, that always throws me off, because what is the praxis? If we're referring to the Principles of Learning and Teaching, which is the test on pedagogy, the test on how to teach, how students learn, that test will not be used in the new system. If we are talking about the praxis content knowledge tests, such as the elementary content knowledge test, the mathematics content knowledge test, those are requirements for the issuance of an associate license in a subject under the new system. So that when you go to 301 and it talks about content knowledge assessment, those right now are typically praxis tests.
Go ahead.
So those need to be passed prior to receiving an associate license, the content knowledge tests?
Correct.
Okay. Prior to receiving the associate, is that, okay.
Prior to the associate,
yes.
yes.
I just want to make sure I asked the right word. Thank you.
Okay, I'm seeking a motion. Real quick, Vice Chair Cummins.
Okay. Wrong one. I move that we approve R277522 on first reading and pass to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Okay, so the motion on the, yes, go ahead, Trevor.
I apologize. I need to make a clarification. The PLT, the Principles of Learning and Teaching test, will have an aspect in the new system in that a person who is currently on APT, who has to finish their APT plan, the PLT would be part of that plan. So remember, they get the choice to switch to the new rules or to continue with the old, and the old for them would include the PLT. It's actually in the APT rule itself. We've already passed that section, yes.
Thank you. So the motion on the table is to approve R277-522 Draft 1 on first reading and forward for approval to the board on second and final reading. Any discussion to the motion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? That motion passes unanimously. Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to 5.7. Thank you. USBE Appropriate Behavior Model Policy. And Michelle Buse and Jeff, is Jeff here?
It's,
It's just
I'll be
Michelle.
helping her.
Angie's helping her.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, so she presented.
If you want me to, I'll introduce it. And
Yeah,
then
go
we'll
ahead,
turn it over
Angie.
to Michelle. So this last session, HB 391 was passed, which requires the State Board of Education to establish a model policy. And this, in order to provide guidance to LEAs, school districts and charter schools, on a policy that they are required to have if they want to maintain their governmental immunity. And so we'll turn the time over to Michelle because she's been the one who worked on it, as well as she and Jeff worked on the legislation with the sponsor. But Michelle has worked with risk management to create this model policy that then the LEAs have to either adopt this policy or something more strict or stringent than this policy. So I think Michelle could speak to it.
Thank you, go ahead.
So the legislation was not in the education code. It was in the governmental immunity code, and it stated that any elementary or secondary school wherein an employee committed a sexual crime against a student, in order for that school to maintain their immunity from liability as a government entity, they were required to have this appropriate behavior policy in place, have trained their employees on it, and have had their employees acknowledge in writing receiving the training. And when I went back and looked at the current rules, you as a board already had a rule in place that required every LEA to have a code of conduct, which included sexual misconduct with a student being prohibited, but in a more general language. So rather than requiring them to have an appropriate behavior policy and an LEA code of conduct, I suggested that they be combined into one so that a district could, or an LEA could, have just the one policy in place and have it one place that employees look to. When I first put it together, I had separated the policy philosophy statements from the specific conduct. And after looking at it, decided that it would be better to just put all of the expected behaviors and no-nos in one section. So I reformatted it, but the language is still the same. And then we had some confusion between Angie and I in uploading the newer version. It was prepared and ready for you before things went public. So I apologize that the one that went on, I did not look at it. I just assumed it was the updated version. What you have here, I can take any suggestions you had from the other one and find where it is in this policy. So please don't put aside any suggestions that you had. Language that was, after meeting with risk management yesterday, asked to be included so that you would find different is underlined, however. So I do want to point those out to you especially. The language the language I tried to take directly from your LEA Code of Conduct so that it wasn't adding new requirements to a district other than that training piece. If you look on page 3 at line 91, risk management requested that we broaden the protected classes to match what the law includes as protected classes for discrimination. So that was a request from them. On that same page, you can see in lines 95 and 96, right down there, I just changed the way the wording was because it felt more comfortable, not because it changed content. And then the biggest issue that they asked me to address was on page 4 in section 5, how to do training for employees who are currently employed with.
Say that again,
Section 5, page 4.
136.
Yeah, page 4, and it starts on line 136 through 142, and they wanted to provide language that gave a timeline for when they expected LEAs who are covered by risk management to have this training completed.
Board Member Earl.
I just have a question. So we put this policy together, it's looked at and everything, and we approve it. Then the district, they have to individually approve these policies, or they, does that make sense? Do they individually
Yes.
approve them? They go through them and approve them and make whatever changes they want?
Correct.
This is a model policy, in other words, and then they, okay.
Correct.
That's- I
Every
just
Board
wanted
of
to understand.
Education will incorporate into that specifics that they have. I know that at one board meeting, Board Member Nielsen said in our school district, students and our teachers are not allowed to text students at all. So the district could make it stricter.
Okay.
They could put stricter provisions if their specific code
Okay,
of
if their
conduct was
board wanted
stricter.
to.
Correct.
And so let's say this goes out in, what, the end of June, right? 'Cause if we approve it and everything, is there a stipulation in the law that this needs to be in place by fall? Or,
It will be in this model policy, and then risk management will be training superintendents on
Okay.
July the 30th.
so soon?
And they've asked that I put together a training that goes with this. I presented the training to them yesterday. The training looks, interestingly, very much like the NASDAQ training before I had ever looked at it. The training I created looks very similar, other than it does not have an interactive question time period because we don't have the money behind it to do that. But the training will be presented to superintendents and distributed to them July the 30th
So it's
also.
an online training?
It is a turnkey program that is done with a PowerPoint and a script so that they can present it face to face, because risk management felt like it was more important for it to be something that was presented face to face. I'm just accommodating their request.
I think it's so funny because they, it's important when it's their training for
Yes.
their purposes and their money, but we can't get the money for us.
Go ahead.
So I have just one more question. So then they will put together a form that the teachers will sign, or whoever will sign and say, yes, right, because it requires a signature?
Correct. The different districts do it different ways.
Okay.
Some actually maintain that online, and they'll have
Okay.
an online program so that a teacher can say, yes, I was trained in FERPA this year. Yes, I
Okay,
read this
okay.
training for legal liability protection of employees this year. Yes, I took this training this year. And they did ask me to put together a model form.
Okay.
So
Okay.
before
I
it
ju-
comes to the whole board,
Yeah.
I will have a model form there that you could look at, not that you would have to approve that part of it.
I see. And I'm just asking because in UPAC, this is a frequent question we have,
Okay.
is did they know for sure kind of a thing? So this might answer some of those questions
Okay.
moving down the road. But
Okay.
Board Member Lear, did you have?
I have two concerns, and I just wanted to see what Michelle would think about them. Again, I could be talked out of them. One of them I feel more strongly about, but line, and thank you for the line numbers, that makes it so much easier. Line 81 in the version that Michelle passed out. I wonder if it should say viewing with the student or intentionally allowing.
That's straight out of the statute.
Oh. I feel like that's a lot to expect from an employee. Okay. The other one is on, line 95, starts on line 95. A staff member may not be, and it's frustrating, if you tell me this is right out of the statute, I'll be frustrated.
No,
It's
it is not.
Because there's a different standard in the educator standards.
I could put just exactly what's in the educator standards
Well,
in there.
and let me just tell you the concept, and a staff member may not use or be under the influence of alcohol. Actually, the educator standard says to the point that it impairs his judgment or work, and I think that's too loose, but I would like to go with a staff member may not use or be under the influence of alcohol or illegal substances during work hours on school property. And so you might have to do this in two places. While, and I had written it this way, so it would go at the end of that sentence and at the end of the next sentence, while in a supervisory capacity. Because I think it's wrong to say you can't go out and have a glass of wine with friends and then come to a football game that's in your neighborhood because you will be under the influence. And same with tobacco. If you are at a school-related activity that does not restrict the use of tobacco, I don't think it's our job to tell educators how they can live their private lives if they're not in a supervisory capacity.
Vice Chair Cummins.
My question is, I believe this is for all employees of this school, correct? And
It
so
is.
I think using the word supervisory would mean that they would have to be functioning over someone, whereas you have secretaries or
You have a custodian who is cleaning
right?
up after the basketball
They're not
game.
supervising anything.
Then let me tell you what my intent is, and maybe you can come up with a different word. Because I think leaving it open-ended like this is very unfair to employees who are living their private lives. I'm saying who are there, not who are there in a maybe official capacity is better, or an employment capacity, so that if they're sweeping up or cleaning up, if they're handing out tickets, if it's the marching band supervisor director, if it's the pep club advisor, if it's a coach, any who's not a soccer coach and it's a football game, or it's a football game and he's a football coach. So I think it's anybody who's in a employment capacity or official capacity, or you identify the words. And if you object to the concept or versus the word choice.
No. So would it be okay if I put employment as your proposed amendment instead of supervisory? So that
That's
you're on
fine
the
with
same
me.
page?
It's fine with me.
So I'm fine with that change, yeah.
Okay.
I just have an additional question. So I'm just curious if there's any school-sponsored event that allows tobacco and alcohol.
I am not aware of one. At schools, there's a state
no,
law that says
yeah.
you
It
can't
could
have
be at
alcohol,
school.
and at schools you can't have
So you're-
smoking.
So you're just saying that I can't smoke or I can't drink at a school-sponsored activity, but I might show up
Under the
slightly
influence.
under the influence to a
Because
football game because
My view of under the influence is you've had any drop of alcohol in your system is under the influence.
Is there a legal definition of that? though?
There
I mean,
isn't, but there's a lot of distinction between not a drop, which is not a drop, versus not impaired.
And there are school districts that have a not a drop standard for employment purposes during employment. And then there is the professional standard that we have in the rule,
515.
which says if you don't exceed a certain blood alcohol level.
And interestingly, it all has that impairment language in it. So there's different standards that exist, but so that's my point about the alcohol. The smoking, I'm thinking of occasions where there's a school-sponsored trip to France, and you are you'd be in an official capacity there. So employment capacity. If you are, maybe you're attending a school play that's for some reason at the Eccles Theater downtown, and there's a smoking area, and you can smoke there. I just don't want anybody inadvertently to be trapped because the person's not in an employment situation but chooses to have a cigarette.
So, for clarity's sake,
or even have chewing tobacco.
We aren't sure what your proposed amendments, like.
Okay.
To be able to have like a vote, I just am not
Okay,
sure.
let me try then. I get it. So Michelle was saying, or on school property, at school, and this is the first sentence under C. At the end of that first sentence, or at school-sponsored events,
It's actually
what line?
Line 95, 96.
Oh, I got
So
it.
look at the end of line 96.
Are you on draft
On
two?
draft 2.
I actually had
You can
92,
use
but-
that. You can use that same language, but we'll just say for the new one that I passed out, it's line 95, 96.
Yep, I got it. But go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm looking at the wrong one. Yes. And it would say, at the end of after events, it would say in a employment
capacity. So, and that would be up to you to vote if.
Yeah, that's what
And then
I'm
that would
saying.
But nothing else that you've gone through thus far were official amendments?
No.
Okay.
The other, it was the intentionally and,
That was word for word on the
and
statute.
yes, it comes
Right.
from the statute, so we can't change that. So I would put what we just said, the phrase we just added, at the end of the first sentence under little I. I would also add that under the second sentence, at the end of the second sentence, under little I.
So
So you want it
Twice.
both places?
Well, I think you have to cover both tobacco and alcohol.
Okay.
okay.
And of course, saying that they have to follow the law, if there is no smoking allowed, that doesn't make it allowed. It's just if they are in a setting on a football field in North Yahoo, and it is somehow beyond the football field, the person could smoke. That's what I don't want to curtail people's personal freedom if they're not in an employment capacity or on school property.
Thank you. Were there any other?
No, those are the only two I had.
Okay. So there's an amendment on the table to amend the model policy for employee-student relationships to amend line 96 after events to say in an employment capacity, and line 98 after activities to say in an employment capacity. That's the amendment on the table. Any discussion to that amendment?
However you think it reads well.
Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That amendment passes unanimously. We'll go back to, I don't think anyone's made a motion yet. I'm seeking a motion.
I'll make that motion.
Go ahead.
I move that the Law and Licensing Committee approve the model policy for employee-student relationships and draft two as amended, and send that to the board for second and final reading.
Which is
And
to
approval.
approval.
And
Okay,
for
so does it
approval.
need to say
not
this or this?
No, it's okay. I mean, this is what
It's
that
the same thing.
is.
Okay, so the motion on the table is that the Law and Licensing Committee recommends the USBE Model Appropriate Behavior Policy.
Do you want to
Do I-
change
which
the
way-
name of
which-
that?
which
'Cause
name do
is
you
a
want it
different
to be?
name.
I think that we don't want to confuse districts, and I want districts to feel like they don't have to make an additional policy.
So
that
which
they-
one do you want? This one or
The
that one?
current rule actually says LEA Code of
But we can
Conduct.
change the rules. Should we call it
You have it
an appropriate behavior policy, or should
Or-
we call it employee-student relationships?
The statute asks for an appropriate behavior policy, but I don't think that calling it a code of conduct would not fill that. So I'll let you decide how you would like to label it.
So
right now-
USBE Appropriate Code of Conduct Model Policy?
No, we don't want
No?
USBE, because this is
Okay.
our model policy, but we could call it.
We
the
want it to match your
appropriate
rule.
behavior. So we could call it the model policy / appropriate behavior policy, right?
They'll probably name it what they want, but I would want to make sure if you decide to amend the rule to include that training and acknowledgement piece, we maybe could name them the same so that
I
districts would see that that is fulfilling the responsibilities of that rule.
I don't think technically titles are not part of the
No.
approval process, so you can fuss with that and find the right.
Well,
Okay.
I just noticed we actually have 3 different titles. We have the bill saying appropriate behavior policy, our rule says LEA Code of Conduct, and then the model policies is employee-student
Then you guys
relationships.
figure it out.
So should we say what the statute says? We can just go with that,
Yeah.
so that then there's clarity.
I think
what
it's
does the
broader than
statute say?
employee-student relationships.
Yeah,
So-
you're right.
So I would go broader than employee-student relationships.
So appropriate behavior policy.
Okay.
No, because it is a model policy.
And it's only for adults or employees or
Correct.
something, so it's Not for
volunteers.
parents or volunteers?
Okay.
It is
So the-
actually for
Oh,
volunteers
volunteers.
who spend substantial unsupervised time with students.
Yeah.
That's what the
Yeah.
rule
But it's not for
says.
students, and
No.
it's not for parents. It's not for
So
uncles.
the motion on the table is that we approve the appropriate behavior policy as a model policy and recommend it forward it to the board for approval with a favorable recommendation. Any discussion to that motion? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed?
Thank you.
Thank you. Can we take a 5-minute restroom break? We have 2 left. I need to use the restroom too, so. Yeah, sorry.
I think that is a gift, that risk management. The only reason I'm okay about it is because they'll do a better job. They'll do a better job than they ever would.
They got to use her to.
Yes, I have those. I will add that in. Yes.
I'll ask that they change the title of this rule to this.
The conduct calls them staff and then defines staff. So
Right, I remember that.
that's a new thing I never used before, but.
I don't know why, but we could, but it is in the policy, you put staff.
Do I
Yeah.
have to use a card to go to the bathroom?
Yeah, you do.
Go down the elevator.
Or you can go down the elevator, you can go down the elevator.
The elevator I don't?
You do after 5. Oh, it's only 4.
It's only 4 and we are going to. I have to catch a flight, so we can't be here after 5.
Uh-oh.
How are you doing?
I do need to go to the bathroom.
So do I,
Just
but
telling everybody.
maybe we should all go.
As I mentioned to Michelle, I always wait till I'm like running down the stairs. I don't know, I have this abhorrence of public bathrooms. So I put it on. That's yours?
No, this is.
Oh, man, stiff even. So Scott.
So, it's part of the appeal process, right? So you need to give staff time to either look at, basically, you get a completely.
I think I'm gonna run in the restroom too.
File their appeal. And so really what we needed was, because the board doesn't meet in July, so normally the process would be staff would do their due diligence and put together the final letter that says, okay, had your appeal, you still owe this much, or however that comes out. So we go back to finance committee, so that the finance committee in June can make a recommendation. There's no July meeting. So, obviously, it needs to regardless, because the deadline for payment is the end of June, right? So what we asked, what staff asked for was unanimous decision to forward it into the consent calendar. So that's all. So Laura did ask some questions about payroll, educator. I'm still concerned. I still think that there's still information that we don't know.
So they didn't grant the appeal, it wasn't.
Well, we don't, no.
There wasn't a recommendation.
There wasn't a recommendation yet. That recommendation will occur now to the full board.
Oh, okay.
Does that make sense?
So there wasn't any recommendation from the superintendent to grant or deny. It was the board's, it would be the board's discussion.
Because of the timing and the fact that whatever balance they have towards the federal government has to be satisfied. Because of the findings, because of the Code of Federal Regulations requires that.
But there was no, so then there was no recommendation. finish the school
Well,
because
there's no,
we don't
motion,
need to.
right. There's been no decision to close. There's been no, and that's what.
It's just the money that's in the pay back.
Yeah.
Oh, hello, Carol. Oh,
No, you're fine. We weren't discussing anything to do with closure or.
But isn't it kind of important the money for president back to school?
No, well, it's not a given because technically the school could make the decision. So what do they owe if they still owe $185,000, they have to pay it with state unrestricted dollars. They could cut their budget to make that payment. They could do that.
It's possible.
You know, but we don't know. We don't have access to their books. And we don't have access to it doesn't sound like that's just it, though. Especially no matter who it's with, it's really between the business administrator or they went out and contracted for services. And them, right? All this process is says, allows them
Okay, do I have enough back yet?
You guys can also say, well, no, we don't.
Yeah, I do. So Cindy's in the bathroom. We'll give her. Oh, I need Angie.
Okay, let's reduce it from 186 to maybe reduce it from 186 to 174. And you would ratify that. So then that allows for the costs to take place of them having to pay back. So that we're fully transparent, we're meeting all the code of federal regulations.
Thank you. Okay. Committee members, if we can get started again. So we can, yeah. Okay.
Just one amendment. And then we're going to change the title too. We're changing the title.
Okay, audience and committee, we're going to go ahead and get started again. Mr. Jones. Board Member Lear and Scott, if you could, we need to get started again. I apologize. Okay, so we're going to move to 5.8 R277-322, LEA Codes of Conduct. We need to repeal and create a new rule. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to Angie.
Yeah, and I'll be happy to explain the difference between the two. So originally, we were just going to amend 517, which is an accompanying rule to the model policy we just discussed. A lion's share of what is in the model policy came from R277-517. This week, Ben and Travis reminded me that we are taking all of these 500 number licensing and employment related numbered rules and turning them into 300 number rules to kind of track with what we're doing with 301, 302, 303, et cetera. So that is why you've got 517 there as a repealed document, and then you'll see R277-322 is just the new numbered version. So I'm going to highlight what's actually new language first, and because although the 322 looks like it's all new language, it really isn't all new. So the lines 15 through 20, so the definition of sexual conduct, sexual abuse, and sexual battery, all of that is directly from statute and from HB 391, and that language is new to the rule. And then also on 22, where it states the superintendent shall create a model code of conduct policy. And I'm going to make a recommendation in just a minute that we change every reference to code of conduct policy to appropriate behavior policy. But that, of course, is new, and that's due to HB 391. And then the other new language can be found on lines 42 and 43, a statement that a staff member may not participate in sexual conduct with a student. That is also from HB 391. And then last, lines 66 or 67, a staff member shall sign a statement acknowledging the staff member has read and understands the policy, also comes from HB 391. But the rest of the language in 322 is currently found in R277-517. So we would ask that as you pass, and if you pass 322, that you also repeal 517.
So we'll need two motions. Vice Chair Cummins.
I move that we approve R277-322, Draft 1 on first reading and give to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Thank you. So the motion on the table is to approve R277-322, Draft 1, and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Any discussion to the motion? Now we need some amendments, but at least, so yes, go ahead.
So I move that we change all of the references to the code of conduct to
appropriate behavior
behavior.
So the amendment on the table is to change all references to code of conduct and insert appropriate behavior policy. Any discussion to the amendment? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? That amendment passes unanimously. So we're back to the original motion as amended to adopt R277-322 Draft 1 as amended and forward to the board with a favorable recommendation on second and final reading. Any discussion to that motion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. That motion passes unanimously. Well, thank you. That was speedy. Now we're going to move to our final, oh, we need one more. Yep. Thank you. We need another motion.
Yes. 5.9. What do you mean another motion?
To repeal.
Oh, yes.
I forgot to. Go ahead, Vice
I
Chair
move
Cummins.
that we repeal R277-517 on first reading and recommend that to the board on second and final reading.
Thank you. So the motion on the table is to repeal R277-517 on first reading and recommend to the board repeal it on second and final reading. Any discussion to that motion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes unanimously. Now we will go ahead and move on to 5.9. And we will invite, it's Kindergarten Supplemental Enrichment Program and TANF contract obligations. And Jennifer, go ahead and introduce yourself. And
Jennifer Thoronson, Director of Teaching and Learning.
Go ahead.
Okay. So basically what's in front of you is DWS reached out, who is the contract provider for the TANF funds for the Kindergarten Supplemental Program, and expressed that we're not in compliance with our contractual obligations. So we have 9 different areas that we have to report on annually as spoken to in our contract with DWS. We are currently out of compliance in 2 of those 9, number 4 and number 7, which are both related to the social emotional skills data collected on the KEEP. At this time, the board has decided, when we signed the contract, the intent was to provide that data. When it actually came to KEEP, we decided not to collect the social emotional data for kindergarten at the board level, and so we have not been collecting that data, nor is it available to provide to DWS. And so at this point, wanted to bring the contract to your attention that we are out of compliance and seek a solution. So in my mind, there's 3 potential solutions. Feel free to add to those solutions. 1, we can remain out of compliance and wait for corrective action. 2, we can start collecting the social emotional data for the students, at least in the kindergarten supplemental program. It would be difficult in terms it does ask for a control group. You could do the ones at the schools in the kindergarten supplemental as a potential. Or 3, just seek a contract amendment to see if we can remove the social emotional components and see if what potential changes DWS might require. They've been under a strict audit on TANF. And so they've kind of hinted at there might be additional things we'll have to do in the contract amendment if we choose to amend, just because their audit findings have been that their process has not been rigorous enough in their contract. So potentially, one example they gave was you'll have to prove the TANF reason we're using is to reduce out-of-wedlock pregnancies by giving kids full-day extended kindergarten. It's a long process to get there, but there is a way to route that. It's an interesting route. So I just wanted to lay out the challenge we're facing and seek a resolution of what the board would prefer we do to resolve the compliance issues with the KSUP grant. It is 1 more year, just so you know.
Thank you. Board Member Davis and then Vice Chair Cummins.
What was the reason that we were not collecting that data? What was the reasoning in the beginning?
There was just board members that didn't feel comfortable collecting the social emotional data, and so as a board, they decided we'll go ahead and administer the KEEP. Teachers can give that section, but we will not collect it at the state level, the actual individual student data or aggregate level data.
Can I ask a follow-up, Chair? What's an example of the social emotional data that they didn't want collected?
So the last half of the test, the third, there's 8 questions related to things like being able to stay engaged in the task that you're on. So while we're giving the test, we've had kids crawl across the table or various behaviors that show in this 10 to 15 minute selection that maybe their attention might need some support in the classroom in terms of we might need to keep them closer on the rug or whatever it might be in kindergarten. And so those are some of the things that it's really self-regulation skills. They ask for help when they need help, things like that. So that was just the feedback at the time. That was a couple years ago, so the board has had some morphing and changing, but.
Vice Chair Cummins?
What are the potential consequences of moving forward in a non-compliant manner? So is there the potential to have to repay TANF funding if?
They haven't hinted at that. It would just probably be a corrective action notice, which would then require you to take action of some sort to correct the non-compliance.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yes.
So if this funding is only another year, what?
Right. I am just doing, they called me and I said, I'll ask the board what you would like. So in terms of all they've really said is, you said you would do this, you're not. How would you like to come into compliance? And so I brought that to the superintendency, who said, ask the board what they would prefer.
Okay.
And I'm open to whatever you would like. I just would love to give them an answer of what we will do.
I'm going to go to Angie real quick and then board member.
Yeah, I think it's just maybe helpful clarification that DWS is the one who is responsible, or they are holding the money. And so they've asked Jennifer to come to you because they're wanting to take care of this. And so I agree with you. I mean, I think I'm reading between the lines, which is what's the risk right now if we don't do anything. But I think in some ways, we need to help Jennifer know what to say to DWS because they're wanting to either amend the contract or do something.
Okay, I'm going to go to board member Earl.
Yeah, well, I read it. It seemed that, and I could be wrong on this, that the audit element was kind of broad. It was just, you need to be back in compliance, but it wasn't directed at us. It was directed, I mean, and there's a variety of programs, right? So,
yes, are you talking the TANF?
Yeah.
In general.
So, I mean, when I read that,
They've just had to change all of their processes around all of their contracts because of the audit. So I just wanted to,
okay, so
that's why all this is coming up.
At this point, I just recommend we change our contract with them. That's my recommendation. Can I put that to my motion is that we just change the contract so that it meets what.
To come into compliance.
Yeah, come into compliance with what we're doing.
Vice Chair Cummins. So there's a motion on the table to recommend seeking contract amendment.
Yeah. So I would speak in favor of that as well, because it feels like if we go with option 1 and say we're just going to come into compliance, we're going to be collecting 1 year's worth of data. And what's the purpose? The purpose of the data had to do with changes over time, et cetera. And so it just makes it would just be an exercise in nothing.
Meeting compliance.
Yeah, meeting. And so that's why I would support this option, because then it just says, we'd like to change the contract so that you're in compliance and we're not doing unnecessary tasks for no purpose at all.
Thank you. Board Member Davis?
I didn't realize my light was on, but I will say, so do they have to agree to change the contract then? Does someone have to agree to this, or?
No, so she could come back to us after she seeks contract.
So we'll work with them to get the amendment and then bring it back to the board for a consent calendar item so you can review the contract again. We just had those 9 data points, and when I produced the report with only 7, they were like, hey, 2 are missing. And I said, well, they're not available, hence why they're not in the report. And that just kind of brought awareness to we weren't meeting our contractual obligations.
And they're afraid that's going to jeopardize their
I think because they're being so closely watched in terms of their TANF implementation, that they're just trying to really tidy up their contract and making sure that they are reviewing and monitoring and meeting compliance, because we all write contracts and you never look at them again necessarily. And I think they're just trying to be a little more proactive about what does the contract say and holding people to the contract. I don't anticipate it being a difficult negotiation. They really just wanted a resolution to the conflict.
Thank you. I also am in favor of, this is the motion I was going to recommend also. So the motion on the table right now is to seek an amendment to the contract. And seeing no further discussion, we'll go ahead and take a vote. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? So that motion passes unanimously. And without objection, since we've reached the end of our agenda, we will conclude our Law and Licensing Committee. Thank you.